I got off of work at around 10 p.m. and headed out. I live alone and always make sure my front door is locked before I leave for work. When I got home, the door was unlocked. I knew for a fact I locked it when I left because, like I stated, I always lock it. I also have severe OCD and would not have forgotten to lock my door as I am too obsessed with my routine to forget. I was thoroughly unsettled by this and immediately retrieved my 9mm pistol from the drawer next to my front door. I set the bag of fast food I had picked up down and looked around the dark living room, fumbling for the light switch. Once the light flicked on, to my utter horror, my apartment was in complete disarray. Paperwork strewn all about the floor that had been put away in my office, and my social security card and birth certificate were among the mess. I quickly made my way to my office, and once I entered the room, I found all the drawers were open and my computer had been turned on and was on the lock screen as if somebody had tried to get into my computer. I checked the rest of my apartment and didn't find anybody. I put my gun back and immediately phoned the police. They arrived fairly quickly and took a report of the break-in. They asked me if I had any enemies or if I had made anyone mad recently, to which I responded that I hadn't. No such thing had occurred, and furthermore, I am not the type to have quarrels with people. I was quite dumbstruck by what I had come home to. I cleaned up the mess and attempted to sleep, but tossed and turned most of the night, while lying with my gun under my pillow. I would like to add that I am also a very paranoid person, so the whole thing naturally had me extremely freaked out, and every night I go to bed, I have my gun under my pillow now. The next day I had off, so I left to go hiking with my girlfriend. We started dating 6 months ago. I left around 9 a.m. and stopped by the Starbucks next to my apartment. While I sat in the busy drive-thru line, I looked up and noticed a man staring at me from across the street on the same side as my apartment complex. The thing that was the most interesting about this man was how much of a resemblance to me he bared. This guy had the same hair as me, was about the same height and weight, wore glasses like me, and looked to be about the same age as me too. He didn't appear to have any expression on his face and just stood there still as a statue staring at me. It was my turn to get my order, so I grabbed my coffee, and when I went to pull out of the drive-thru, the man was gone. The day went as planned, and my girlfriend and I had a great day together. I told her about the incident in my apartment and the man who looked like me, and she joked that perhaps my doppelganger had broken into my apartment. After I parted ways with my girlfriend, I made my way home. I was a little bit nervous to return home, fearing whoever had broken into my apartment might have returned. Whatever they were there for that night, they seemed to be looking for something. I arrived back at my apartment and made my way to my apartment unit. I live upstairs, and as I approached the stairs to my front door, I heard somebody coming down the stairs. I was still a good distance from the stairwell and was alarmed, as I didn't have a neighbor that lived upstairs. Therefore, nobody should have been coming down those stairs. I stopped to see who it was, and to my shock, it was none other than the same man I had seen earlier that morning. He walked quickly and looked down as he walked. I shouted at him to stop, but as soon as he heard me, he took off running and hopped the fence that separates the apartment complex from a large field and disappeared into the night. I ran upstairs to my apartment and tried the doorknob, which was once again unlocked. I went inside and was horrified. All the walls in my living room were pictures of me and my girlfriend from that day. Pictures that looked as if they had been taken right from the tree line next to the trail she and I were on. I once again called the police to report the break-in. They came and searched the apartment as well as the entire complex. I told them about the man I had seen running into the field. They searched the field and returned with a pair of eyeglasses and a wig. The police took the items they found into evidence and opened a case. They stationed 2 police cars outside my apartment and informed the apartment manager about what was going on. It's been almost a week since all of this started, and nothing else has happened since. No more random break-ins or creepy photos of me and my girlfriend. I've also been staying with a coworker of mine until things die down. I have no idea why. Whoever is doing this is targeting me. Based on the items the police found in the field, my guess is this person is actually pretending to be me for some odd reason. I don't know what any of this means. I'll be sure to give an update if anything else happens. When I was a teenager, I dated a guy a couple years older than me that we'll call Nate. He was always exceptionally sweet and would tell me how I deserved the world. We never really broke up. He would just move away, and it would be agreed that we wouldn't date anymore. We would always end up connecting back with each other no matter what. Then when I was 17, he went to jail for stabbing his stepdad. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year at that point. Afterwards, he would never talk about it in detail, but he would explain that he saw no choice at the time. His stepdad even went to his court hearings and stated that he wasn't to blame and that he made the mistake of cornering him in a violent rage. When he got out of jail, he seemed to be a different person. He was much more mature. He got a well-paying job right away, and he discovered the love of cooking, and he was clean and organized and well-read. He looked me up the first day he got back to town, and we slowly started developing a friendship and eventually started casually dating. He began staying at my home on weekends, and then after a few months he needed a place to stay for a month and a half between selling his trailer and moving into a nicer rental. And things honestly seemed to be really good. We were talking about maybe moving in together, and he would hint at the idea of proposing. Then one day he started drinking again and became unsettling and weird. Almost immediately after he started drinking, he began lying, and I started to get the big heebie-jeebies. He would say he was leaving for work, but then an hour later, his coworker would come to the door and ask where he was. When I would ask him about it, instead of calmly explaining that he was at his mom's on the way to work or something, he would storm off and ignore my calls for days. I immediately ended the relationship, telling him he could stay at his mom's until his place was move-in ready. A friend of mine came over to my house and helped me neatly pack up all of his stuff, and we dropped it off at his mom's for him. I can't tell you exactly why, but we also decided to put chain locks on the door that Nate had a key to, because even though he had given my key back, I had a completely unfounded suspicion that he made a copy without telling me. Sure enough, that night, Nate came to my door without calling and without knocking and tried to let himself in. I had rested my skateboard against the door, so when it opened, I heard the crash. I heard him cuss under his breath and leave. The next day I came home from walking my dog with a male friend who I had been friends with my entire life and would hang out with the both of us. There was a picture I had painted for Nate on the front porch of my house. It had blood splattered all over it. I asked my friend what I should do, and he was honestly kind of horrified. It was too big to fit in the garbage can, and I didn't want his blood-covered painting just sitting around my house, so later that night we ended up burning it in the outdoor fireplace. A few days later, Nate called me and asked if he could come over later and talk. I said that it was fine, and he told me he would be over at about 7 p.m. At 8:30, he hadn't called or shown up, so I was sitting at my computer when I got a call from my aunt who had a police scanner. Nate had apparently broken into a woman's house with a gun, and she had shot at him with a shotgun. The police eventually caught him running in the direction of my house. He went back to jail, but only for about 6 months since they couldn't find the gun he had, and because the woman whose house he broke into didn't want to cooperate with the police. He ended up getting a very light charge. Around this time, I had started dating somebody else. We'll call him Sam. And the very first time we were out around town together, Nate saw us and came over and ripped his shirt off, challenging Sam to a fight. Sam responded just by kind of chuckling in discomfort, and we got back into the car and left. This became a semi-regular occurrence, and then one night we were cuddled up in my living room watching TV, and we heard something hit the patio window really loudly. We went and looked around, expecting there to be a bird or something, but we couldn't find anything. The next day after Sam had left, I had gone outside onto the small patio, and in the light of the day, I could see what we had missed the night before. It was a bullet for a hunting rifle. It looked like it had been thrown at the window from over the fence. I ended up moving away and marrying Sam. Nate actually randomly. He showed up once when we were meeting up with an all-around mutual friend, and it was pretty weird. But it was pretty coincidental, so we shrugged it off. A little while later, Nate went back to jail for breaking into another woman's house. He was released after a certain amount of time after that as well. Then almost immediately after his release, he was all over national news because he had been caught trying to kidnap multiple children, going so far as to take one child and choke them until the father by coincidence found them and was able to pull him off of him. The boy survived, but he was unconscious for a while. He suffered no brain damage, but was pretty shocked and likely will be for life. After Nate was incarcerated for that, he was arrested right after his release for the murder of a woman in the town he had grown up in several years earlier because they had only discovered her remains while he was in jail. Details were never publicly released because the trial is still ongoing, but the rumor is that he broke into her house, having been casual acquaintances with her, and killed her and then moved her body to a small forested area on a mutual friend's parents' house. He also allegedly killed his cellmate while he was in jail, but he was found not guilty because the jail mishandled a bunch of the evidence and the prison guards mixed up their stories a bit, so the case couldn't prove he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. His cellmate was just a poor young kid, barely 19, in jail for theft. Of course, the kid should have gone to jail, but in no way should that been a death sentence. While he's in jail, he has apparently attacked multiple female prison guards by choking them. There are, of course, rumors around town that some other missing people were also his doing. Yeah, there's a bunch more true stories about women catching him, trying to break into their house that never made it to court because they didn't know who it was at the time, so police had no one to look into. And they only realized it was Nate when his face became plastered all over the media. I often think of the fact that I intimately knew this person, and sometimes I feel guilty for not having seen the signs. Other times I feel creeped out that I could have been a victim of this. I feel like I somehow should have known that I was living with a potential serial killer, but until he started drinking, he truly seemed like a stand-up guy that had made bad decisions and was just doing his best to make a decent life for himself. Up until very recently, I never spoke about him or even acknowledged that I knew him. Obviously, my husband knows, but he knows it makes me uncomfortable and we just don't discuss it. I guess I just wanted to share this creepy encounter story here, as a way to process it. Hey guys, the first time I shared on Reddit, I was really encouraged by the upvotes and comments you guys left. That post was about some experiences I had abroad, but to really live up to my username, I have stories about both my farm and my boyfriend's farm that might be interesting to you. Farms have a lot of history. My family has been farming in the exact same spot since the 1870s when my family arrived from Germany, and his family has been farming in the same area since the 1930s. Therefore, they have lots of tills. My boyfriend's dad, I'll call him my father-in-law, because he basically is. I swear he has seen everything at least once and has the most interesting stories. I'll share a couple of his to start. For context, my boyfriend's family farms on both sides of the Iowa and Missouri border since they live fairly close to the state line. They have corn, soybeans, and beef cattle on pasture. I particularly love the cattle because I love getting to jump in the Ranger and ride around the pasture with my boyfriend to check on the cows. We do this almost every night in the spring and summer, and even fall, to make sure they are healthy and not injured, and to account for the calves. Make sure they have enough grass and look to see if there are any holes or breaks in the fences. In the wintertime, they get moved to a lot with a covered shed to protect them from the elements, so they are not in the pasture and we feed them hay. Anyway, in the mid-2000s, my father-in-law was out in the wooded area of the cattle pasture. The trees are quite dense here, and it often serves as a great deer hunting spot in the late fall or winter once the cows have been moved to the winter lot. He was setting up trail cameras in the woods to watch deer in preparation for hunting season that fall. After some time, he came back out to get the card out of the camera to see if there were any big bucks roaming around. When he took a look at some of the pictures, he saw that there had been an unusual man back there. Trespassers aren't all that uncommon, and often it's just an annoyance rather than cause for concern. There was no way to tell who it was, so he just forgot about it. A few days later, he went back to hang the camera back up in the tree. When my father-in-law went back a second time about a week later to get the camera to see the pictures, somebody had dug 3 makeshift graves in the back corner of the pasture. At the head of each grave was a wooden cross with a first name on it. He unfortunately didn't catch the man on trail camera, but he alerted the police about the situation. I think based on the names of the crosses, the police had an idea of who it could have been. The rural Midwest is smaller than you think for being so vast. My father-in-law wasn't really sure what came of that and never looked too much into it. But if he hadn't discovered those graves in the pasture and alerted the police, they might have been filled. For the second story, my father-in-law had some farms in Missouri that were bordered by the Missouri River. The Missouri River flows down through the Dakotas, along the Iowa and Nebraska border, and then at Kansas City, it takes a turn and divides the state of Missouri into two, until it reaches the Mississippi River. One spring in the late 1900s, he was out in a field next to the Missouri River planting corn. This was before all the current high-tech tools that farmers have at their disposal now, which can tell you if you have an issue with your machine right from the cab. He thought that his planter was having some issues, so he jumped out to check if something was broken. When he got out of his tractor, he noticed a really strange smell. A bad smell. If you know anything about farming, planting season is a fast-paced time to try to beat the weather, and he was more concerned about getting his crop planted than investigating. He just assumed that it was a dead deer washed up in the river and continued on until he thought the planter was having problems again a few hours later. This time, he was on the end of the field closer to the river. The smell was stronger and unlike anything he had experienced before. They continued on that day, working until one of the hired men asked if anybody noticed the bizarre smell coming from the river. My father-in-law said he had and wondered to them if it was a dead deer, but usually deer didn't stink quite like this. One of the hired men wandered across the field to the edge of the river. It's not like a nice sandy beach that touches the ground to make a shoreline. Often, it is a rocky or steep overlook many feet down to the river below, to get a closer look. At the bottom, he saw what he thought was an animal tangled in the branches washed up by the river. Looking closer, he realized it was a person. They immediately called the police. Turns out, it was a missing woman who was a known prostitute from Kansas City who had made it this far downstream. I cannot find the exact article or name, and I don't know if the police ever told my father-in-law her name, even though they briefly questioned him, but I do know there are a few articles of women being found on the river east of Kansas City in the late 1990s. Those are the two I'll share for now. Let me know if you're interested in any more strange tales from many years of farming. I was a late bloomer in terms of sexuality. I had a traumatic experience that made me not want to date much in high school. So it's surprising that not even a year after graduating, I was so excited to date Jeff. He was older than me by a few years and messaged me on MySpace that he thought I was pretty and wanted to hang out. We went on a few dates and held hands and stuff. He thought it was cute that I had never been kissed before. Things seemed to be okay, and he said he respected that I wanted to go very slow. One night he acted really strange. His friend Matt was over and they kept joking that they should take me to see their friend. I knew something was off because they kept joking that they shouldn't do it, that I was too pure and I would freak out. This was over 10 years ago, so I'm not 100% sure, but I don't remember agreeing to go to this guy's house. I remember asking them to take me home. I was uncomfortable with it and I didn't want to meet this dude. This was supposed to be a date night. Matt wasn't even supposed to be there, and now I'm going to see some other guy. My intuition told me something was off about it. The drive was up a long, unlit, unpaved road up a mountain. On the way, Jeff and Matt were saying things like, "Oh man, she's not going to be your girlfriend after this," and "Dude, we're going to hell for this." I tried to act like I wasn't crying in fear in the back seat. All I asked was where we were going, which they laughed at. I stayed silent and tried to focus on anything that could tell me where we were going, but it was in a rural area I've never been to before. We got to the house. A single-story 2-bedroom surrounded by nothing but unlit nothingness. The friend was an older man, probably late 30s, who I was told was a porn producer. He showed me his red room and Jeff pushed me into it. I let out the terrified scream I've been holding in the entire time. I could still hear how it sounded. It was awful. They all laughed. I walked to the couch in the living room and stayed there the entire night. I was too afraid to even use the bathroom. The rest of the night was spent with him drinking beer while I stood on the couch digging my nails into the palms of my hands, trying not to cry. I didn't eat or drink anything that was offered. Matt mentioned that Jeff used to bring his girls to this house to have sex. Their creepy old friend joked that he could record it. Lots of uncomfortable sex jokes. The creepy old guy told me that virgins can make a lot of money doing porn, like he was doing me a favor. It was almost half my life ago, but I remember exactly how that room smelled, how the fake leather couch felt, and how time seemed to move at an inconsistent speed. I don't remember how I responded to that, but he backed off. Nothing bad happened that night, but when I got home, I collapsed in the shower crying. I don't know why I was taken to that house. After that night, Jeff's tune changed from "we can go at whatever speed you want" to "this trauma is really holding you back, you just need to have sex and get it over with." Looking back, I'm just really grateful I listened to my intuition and ended things with Jeff and cut ties with all of his friends. My current boyfriend and I were talking about weird things that happened to us, and I remember this night. When I told him, he looked horrified, and it occurred to me that night could have gone very differently. First time poster here, long time reader. Sorry if this is too long, I really don't want to bore anyone. I also wanted to say that this story is objectively true, and I tried not to fluff anything to make it seem worse than it was, so yeah, here we go. About 2 years ago, I was long distance dating a guy who was my first love. He loved me too, but unfortunately, due to the long distance and his addiction problems, we had to break it off. As most people react when their relationship or love ends, especially in some cases when it's the first, they enter weeks of depression or denial. I had trouble sleeping for at least a month. This caused me to be late to work almost every day, and as a result, I received a warning that if I didn't fix my attendance issues, then I would be let go. I immediately forced myself to try to occupy my time with my freelance illustration and really attempted to go to bed early. The first couple of days it was rough, but I kept at it. The first night I remember getting work done and sleeping on time was the night it happened. Quick backstory. My roommate and I lived in a house separated into separate living spaces. One for our friends that rented the upstairs and one for us downstairs. I figured I should mention this because our windows, for example, were very easily accessible and unfortunately didn't have locks. We also had a backyard that was fenced off, but like the windows, the fence door was also lock-free. Now to what happened. I was asleep, but due to being a light sleeper and being incredibly heartbroken, I easily awoke to lights coming through the blinds of my bedroom window. Luckily, my bed was adjacent to the window, so they didn't see me. I was still a little bit foggy from being sleep deprived, and because of the melatonin, but forced myself up and whispering voices came from the people holding the flashlights. The people. There were at least 3 of them. It was all such a blur that I can't really remember the detail, but they seemed to be wearing all black and began to move towards the fence of our backyard. I immediately began to feel so emotional at being woken up, and my body went into autopilot. I grabbed my phone and box cutter. I worked at Trader Joe's, where we have to use them every day, and woke my roommate up. I dialed 911 and handed him the phone to tell the police people were attempting to break in. My amazing roommate seemed to understand immediately, despite being shaken awake. I pounded my way to the kitchen, where we had a huge window looking into the backyard, and my adrenaline pumped as I saw the strangers make their way through the fence, their flashlights bobbing around. It was this moment that triggered me into a fit of tears. Not the cute one drop going down my cheek kind, but the type where rivers of tears come down my face, making it difficult for me to see. I mean, my boyfriend who loved left me. I hadn't been able to sleep, the job I left is threatening to fire me, and now these assholes woke me up and are trying to take what little we have. They began to look through our backyard shed, which like an idiot we haven't attached a padlock to. Inside was the bike my dad bought for me, the bikes of our friends who lived upstairs, and old TVs, etc. One of the intruders made their way to our back door, and in a fit of tears and anger, I beat them to it. I flicked our kitchen lights on and swung open the door. The stranger was right in front of me, and jumped backwards. I mean, to be fair, I was holding an incredibly sharp extended box cutter and was crying really badly. I started yelling at them about being woken up and depressed, and how dare they try to rob someone who was barely keeping it together. I was essentially yelling to no one after a couple of seconds because they booked it as soon as I confronted them. The police came, took our statement, asked for descriptions, and said they would look around. They never found anybody, probably because I didn't follow the strangers to see how they got to our place. If so, I could have gotten a license plate or something. It didn't occur to me until afterwards that I should have told them the police are coming, or worried that they might have hurt me and, more importantly, my roommate. Looking back, I feel really bad about risking our lives like that. I really don't know what came over me, but I was holding in so much sadness and anger that these people caused me to let it out. Anyway, that's what happened. I've learned a lot since then, like having our landlord install locks for our windows, and seeing a therapist. It may have worked out for me, but to anybody reading this or listening, please don't be as stupid as me, especially if there are other people whose lives are at stake. I should have waited inside for the police or yelled at them through the window, but I didn't. So yeah, if the people who tried to break into our home are reading this, I hope we never encounter each other again, and I assume the feeling is mutual. I and my husband and daughter moved into the house next door only a month ago, and he never seemed that interested in talking to me until he saw her, and it's worrying me. When we were working outside on a flower bed that faces his house, he came over to talk. Now he's done this twice, mind you, so being completely honest, it didn't seem that weird to me at first, until he acted kind of strangely when he saw her. He got wide-eyed and began acting nervous all of a sudden, and I didn't see the connection until I realized he kept glancing or staring at her while talking to me. He was very flustered and hardly ever looked away, and it started making me uncomfortable. I told her to just go inside and that she'd helped me enough with the bed because I didn't like how he was acting, and I could tell she was starting to get creeped out too. He looks to be 35 to 40, I think, which is just adding to the creepiness of it all. There were a few instances after this where she went outside to check the mail or to take the trash, and he'd come outside every time, trying to talk or just stand there staring at her and saying nothing. After this, she stopped going out the front door and started going out the back door when helping me with the garden or sometimes to get something from our shed. But it wasn't long before he caught on to this as well, because he'd be standing there behind the fence just staring the same way, which means he literally is watching for her to come outside all through the day. She's so creeped out now that the only time she leaves the house is with friends or to go to work. She's not even comfortable standing outside anymore. And to make things worse, now he started coming over every other day or so to knock on our doors to talk, and always ends it with asking questions about her, which are very personal questions, might I add. We've gotten to the point where we don't even answer the door when it's him because it's so weird. The whole thing is just creeping me out because my husband is at work most of the time, and I feel like I can't call the police because he hasn't technically done anything illegal. So what should I do? My friends Jessica, 27 female, and James, 30 male, have been together for 6 years and have lived in their house for over a year now. I'm over quite often. I have been friends and co-workers with Jessica for 4 years. They are wonderful. They have kind of adopted me in a way, and they keep me alive by feeding me a few times a week. So I was over for dinner after work a few weeks ago. We all got to their place within minutes of each other. We all drank and caught up. After a little while, James went outside to grill up some steaks, came in and asked why I kissed the door. I'm pretty confused and go over to the sliding glass door where he is. Sure as the world, there is a kiss print on the outside of the door, lipstick and everything. A few things. James and Jessica are both shorter than I am. He's about 5'8", she's 5'2", and I'm 5'11". The kiss print was at a height that, if I popped up on the balls of my feet, I could reach that spot with my lips. Far above where Jessica could reach, and as much as I love the thought of James in bubblegum pink lipstick, he couldn't reach it either. I haven't worn makeup in many, many years. I don't even own any. I think I have some mascara and an ancient eyeshadow palette, maybe. They both thought it was me playing a prank. After all, Jessica owns lipstick. I could have just been trying to freak them out. Spoilers though, I'm not. But I am a smoker, so I do frequent their back porch through that door. Besides, it's pretty difficult to get on their porch. We got 3 sides, right? Well, the right side is sort of a balcony with a 30-foot or so drop. The left side has a 10-foot drop or so, with the fence, and inside the fence is immediately James' grill and some workout equipment. It's a pretty narrow space and wouldn't be easily navigated with all that junk there. Plus, it's pretty high up. The front of the porch would be the easiest way to get in, but you would have to be dedicated. They have thick, tall boxwood hedges along with the fence, so you get pretty scraped up. At this point, I'm thinking that Jessica just climbed on a chair and kissed the glass. She's pranking me. Well, James cleaned off the glass, and we went on with our night. A few nights later, I'm back at their place. I was going out for a smoke when I saw a kiss on the glass in the same place as nude shade lipstick. About a foot below the lip print, there was a smudgy heart. I'm not sure if this person had really greasy hands or if they used spit or something, but it was extra creepy. I pointed it out to my friends, and again they thought it was me. James even insisted I clean it off the glass. Neither James nor Jessica had ever been one to prank, and neither have I. But I still felt like the most logical explanation was Jessica trying to prank James and me by setting me up or something. The next time it happened, a few days later, when I hadn't been there for a while, Jessica called me. She was a little accusatory and rattled. I do have a key to their house, and she asked if I'd use it to kiss the glass again, because when they woke up, she noticed that there was a lip print on the door. I told her it wasn't me and she let it go, but I could tell she still thought it was me. At this point, I'm not really thinking it's her. Like it could be, but it definitely seems like it's time to give it up already. She seemed genuinely mad at me, and it didn't seem funny at all. It happened a couple more times. Once more while I was over. There was a break for about a week, and then again when I hadn't been there. I had to go to another state for work, and while I was gone, Jessica video called me. She saw me in my hotel room and just started freaking out. She said this whole time she was really holding out hope that this was me, even though it wasn't funny. At least it wouldn't be terrifying. Alas, I am 1,000 miles away, and there is a kiss print on her back door with a heart underneath. She apologized to me for being so adamant that it was me. She just didn't want to be wrong. I told her it's okay and to call the police. She did. They came several hours later, looked around for 5 minutes, and pretty much told her that was weird. Told her she can take pictures and submit them online to them, and said they probably can't through the hedges and over the fence. Thank you, you two specific boys in blue. Big help. So we are all completely freaked out. I suppose it's possible that it is her and or James, and neither of them knows when to call it quits, but I really don't think it is. Somebody is really dedicated to giving them kisses. They ordered a camera. Came a couple of days ago, and I put it on the porch. So far, nothing. I'll let you know if they see anyone. I'm 21, and I want to start by saying that Mr. Hessler came to my dad's retirement party 4 years ago and brought a casserole. I've been sitting with this for a while. Him standing in our kitchen holding a glass of lemonade, making small talk with my uncles like a completely normal human being. He lived next door my entire life. Shoveled our driveway once when my dad threw his back out. Waved every single morning from his driveway for as long as I can remember. That kind of neighbor. The background furniture of a childhood. Present enough to feel safe and unremarkable enough that you never actually look at him though. I'm home for the summer between junior and senior years. My parents left for a 2-week trip to Europe in late June. Their first real vacation in years, and I stayed behind because I had a remote internship running and the timing didn't work. I'd been home alone before plenty of times. I was fine with it. Our neighborhood is quiet and I know everyone on the street, and The house has always felt like the safest place I know. That part is hard to think about now. First thing I noticed was the dirt. I went out to the backyard maybe 4 days after my parents left to check on the garden my mom had going along the back fence, and there was a section in the far left corner that looked wrong. Dirt was pushed up on my side in a small mound, and the grass around it was flattened and pressed down in a path that ran from the fence base towards the pool area. I crouched down and looked at it, and the bottom of the fence panel had been lifted. The gap underneath was wider than it should have been, like something had pushed through repeatedly. I figured an animal, like raccoon, groundhog, or something that found a way under. I made a mental note to tell my dad and went back inside. Over the next few days, other things shifted. The pool cover I had left draped over the edge each night was moved in the morning, folded back in a way I hadn't lifted, and a lawn chair that lived on the left side of the pool deck was on the right now. Also, a towel I'd hung over the ladder was on the ground. I started keeping loose track in my head without fully committing to what I was tracking or why. On the 5th night, I set my phone up on my bedroom windowsill, angled at the backyard, and left it recording and went to sleep. I watched the footage the next morning with a coffee I didn't end up drinking. At 2 in the morning, the fence panel on the far left corner lifted from the bottom and a man crawled through into my backyard. He moved slowly and carefully, crossed the yard in a wide arc that kept him away from the motion sensor light above the back door, and came to the pool area and sat down on the lawn chair closest to the pool. He sat there for 38 minutes. I timed it, just sitting in my backyard in the dark, looking at the pool and the house. Then he got up and crossed back to the fence and crawled out, and the panel dropped back into place. I watched it a few times. I needed to know who it was before I called. The footage was dark and grainy, and the angle wasn't great, and I just needed to be sure. I set the camera up again the next night, but this time I left the back porch light on low and positioned the phone at a better angle. In the morning, I sat on my bed and watched a man crawl through my fence and cross my backyard and sit in my lawn chair for 41 minutes, and I could see his face clearly enough. Mr. Hessler. I called the police and 2 officers came, and I showed them both videos. They watched them twice and said they'd go speak to him. They came back 40-ish minutes later and said that he denied it and claimed the footage was too unclear to identify him definitively, and that without better evidence, they couldn't act beyond filing a report and advising me to look into a restraining order. I was furious. That afternoon was hot and genuinely suffocating, and I made a decision that felt like taking something back. I put my suit on and went out to the pool and got in. My backyard, my pool, my summer. I was not going to let a man I'd known my whole life make me afraid of my own yard in the middle of the afternoon. I was in the water maybe 10 minutes when I noticed him. Mr. Hessler was in his backyard along the fence line on his side with a pair of hedge clippers in his hand. But he wasn't clipping anything. He was standing facing my direction with the clippers at his side. He was not looking at me directly, chin slightly down, but his body was oriented towards the pool and he wasn't moving. I got out of the pool and went inside and locked the back door and stood in my kitchen for a minute, breathing. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom and looked out the window at the backyard. He was at the fence, both hands on the top of it, arms straight, leaning slightly forward, looking at the pool, just standing there on his side of the fence in broad daylight with his hands gripping the top board, staring at the water where I had been 60 seconds ago. Then he looked up, straight up at my bedroom window, directly at me, standing there looking down at him. No pretending and no looking away, no acting like he hadn't been watching. He just looked up at me with both hands still on the fence and held it. I stepped back from the window and called the police again and then told them what was going on, that I had it on my phone camera still running on the windowsill. They came back faster this time. I had clear daylight footage of him standing at the fence staring at my pool and then looking up at my window. That combined with the night footage was enough for them to go back to his property with more authority. They were over there for a long time. A detective knocked on my door about 2 hours later and asked if she could come in and sit down, the way she made me sit down before she did. Along the inside of Mr. Hessler's fence, on his side directly adjacent to the gap he'd been crawling through, they had found a wooden storage box built into the fence structure that wasn't visible from the outside. Inside it were photographs, a notebook with dates, times, and written observations, and a second notebook going further back. She chose her words carefully, said the documentation suggested a pattern of behavior that significantly predated my parents leaving for Europe, that the records went back further than that summer, and that they went back further than when I came home from college. I asked her how far back. She said she wasn't able to share the full contents with me at the time and that a detective would be in touch with my parents directly. She said they were arresting Mr. Hessler and that I should consider staying somewhere else for the night. I called my parents while she was sitting there and they cut off the trip and flew home. My dad asked me when he got back if I wanted to know everything they found. I said I didn't know. He said the detective had advised them that some of what was in those notebooks was information they would all be better off not having in full detail, and that he was inclined to follow that advice. I've never gone back to that house to stay. My parents are selling it. I grew up in that backyard, learned to swim in that pool, spent every summer of my childhood 20 feet from that fence. I don't know what's in those notebooks, and I don't know when it started or what exactly he was recording, or how many summers are documented in that box he built into the fence, like he was planning to stay forever. My dad said the detective told him the records went back at least 7 years. I was 14 7 years ago. I don't let myself think past that point. There's a line I've drawn, and I stay on this side of it because the other side is somewhere I'm not able to go and function. He brought a casserole to my dad's retirement party. I don't know why I always come back to that, and I don't know what to do with it except write it down and hope that someday it stops being the first thing I think of when I wake up in the morning. It hasn't stopped yet. So this happened almost 20 years ago when I was a young 15-year-old girl. I had an older neighbor who taught drums and was a friend of my family's, and I would take drum lessons from him once a week. He only lived like 2.5 blocks away, so I would always walk, and he and his family lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. Well, one summery day when I was walking home at like 4 p.m., broad daylight in a quiet neighborhood, there was a strange man standing across from the end of the cul-de-sac. He had on a big cowboy hat, which was odd for my area, and some facial hair. I don't know, maybe his 30s, and he was just staring at me. He was watching me unabashedly as I walked down the cul-de-sac and crossed the street, and once my back was to him, I could hear that he was following me. My heart sped up. My drumstick seemed like weak protection, and I was wearing these thin little flip-flops, and I remember thinking if I had to kick him, they weren't going to help me much. Less than half a block away from me was a busier street, and I remember thinking if I could just get to the street where people could see me, he'd be sure to back off, but his steps sounded closer, and I could taste my panic knowing I wasn't going to make it. I ended up running up to a house where I kind of knew the family, and I knew a mom with young kids was probably there, and pounded on her door. Tried to open it myself even in my panic. She opened it, and I spilled into her house and locked the door, told her what had happened, and let my heart calm down a little bit. After being inside for maybe 15 minutes, I asked if I could just hop her back fence to go home since it would cut out a block of travel, but when we slid back the drapes of her back door, the dude was leaning against the fence right outside her house where he could see both the front and back door. She ended up loading her kids in the car and driving me home, and later had her husband ask around. It turned out the dude was living with his mother and had just gotten out of jail. I don't know the charges. All I know is that my stomach had been twisted in knots, and it was the first time I tasted beer like that. I don't know what would have happened if he had caught me. This happened close to 20 years ago. I was visiting my parents at their house for a week sometime in late spring and early summer. One morning, my mom woke me up and asked me to come out to the front yard to look at something. Her tone tipped me off to the fact that she was unnerved by whatever it was she had found. She was standing at the end of our sidewalk when I joined her, where she pointed to something where the sidewalk abutted the driveway. Is that what I think it is? It was a trail of dried or drying blood. I could see a few splatters of blood trailing out into the unpaved driveway, but they were hard to discern against the reddish clay and sand of the drive. I soon lost the trail, although the general trajectory was towards the road in front of the house. The other end of the trail led down where the sidewalk turned to run towards the gate between the house and the garage. Enough blood had been lost for there to be large splotches visible on the liriope that borders the sidewalk, as well as on the small patch of lawn between the sidewalk and the north side of the house. The trail led to the holly hedges that grow next to the house. Some of the branches on one of the bushes were bent and broken, the leaves smeared with blood, as was the side of the house behind the holly bush, and there was a sizable, maybe 10 to 12 inch across stain on the soil beneath it. The ivy on the fence next to the bush was also spattered, with some leaves entirely coated with blood. For context, my parents' house lives in a small town. The house and garage are separate structures, with an ivy-covered chain-link fence running between the house and garage to separate the front yard from the back. The lot faces the main north/south road through the town, while behind the lot is a street that runs north between their lot and a neighbor's house. Then it makes a sharp turn to the west, away from my parents' yard. Following that street leads you to another neighborhood on the right, while the left side of the street is bordered by a heavily wooded area that eventually connects with a large swath of mostly unpopulated forest and swamp. From the amount of blood by the holly, we judged that somebody had been hidden there for a little while. Some of the ivy was pulled away from the fence between the house and garage, so it was clear this person had climbed over the fence. From there, the trail became so much clearer as it went across the concrete patio between the house and garage. There's a window AC unit sticking out from the window just past the fence, and on the other side of it, there was much more blood drying in a pool on the patio as well, as more smears higher up on the wall of the house. Again, it looked like the person had hidden there behind the AC unit for a while, and by this point we were certain that it was a person and not an animal, partly because of the sheer amount of blood, and partly because of the smears on the side of the house were up higher, as if a person had leant against the house with blood on their hands or upper body. The trail then picked up again, but with smaller spatters, as if they had managed to control the bleeding somewhat. The track went across the patio and out into the backyard, where it was difficult to follow through the grass. At the far back fence, some of the honeysuckle vines that grew over the fence had been pulled, and the fence was bent, as if somebody had climbed over it there, and again, there were some smears of blood on the vines, from the trail that ran out into the street behind my parents' house, where it became nearly invisible to follow. It was pretty clear that somebody had been injured and was trying to hide, which implied that somebody had also caused the injury and was looking for them. Whatever the injury was, it must have been fairly serious because they lost quite a bit of blood in my parents' yard alone. They had come down the driveway from the main road, and they clearly knew that they could cut through the yard to reach the back street in the neighborhood or the forest beyond. My dad asked the night security guards of local school if he'd heard anything on the police scanners that night about anything weird going on, but the guard hadn't heard anything. My mom told me a few days later that the neighbor who lives on the street behind them told her that he had insomnia that night and had heard someone running down the street around 3 a.m. and also seen a dark-colored truck make several slow passes up and down the street. I'd asked my parents if they wanted to call the police to report, but whatever this was, they were both in their late 60s at the time, and I worried about them having be alone while there were creepy things, presumably involving violence, that were clearly going on right outside their house. My mom declined, not only because there was nothing the police could do, but also because she worried the police might have been involved somehow with what had happened. The local cops had a reputation for being corrupt, so she didn't want to have any sort of involvement. So I took the hose and a scrub brush and did my best to wash away all the traces of whatever it was that had happened the previous night. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well for the remainder of that trip home, nor on the subsequent visits. It was kind of like being in a house in a slasher film. Not the house where the actual violence takes place, but the one down the street where the hero or heroine of the movie runs and hides outside while being pursued by the killer, and the neighbor only finds out the next morning off screen that something bad was happening just outside while they slept. Definitely a creepy feeling, and much closer than I ever want to be to that kind of situation. This happened a few years ago with my friend June when we were maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now. We were out driving around late at night on country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main ways we passed the time. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard in the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times the day before just to hang out. The whole area is heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard is short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden in the woods. Anyways, we started slowly on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones, using our flashlights to read the names and look at the carvings of the stones. I was very comforted by graveyards and the night at the time, so I was honestly very relaxed, and we mused about ghosts and death and whatnot as goth teenagers do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she'd noticed a light in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road, so we turned away and kept walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again, and the light was much closer and obviously quickly moving towards us, and then I heard the sound of someone crashing through the woods. It was obviously someone with a flashlight making a beeline toward us, and we backtracked and ran to the car. I unlocked it and climbed into the driver's seat, turning the car on as fast as I could, and right before the lights came on, this huge grizzly-looking man, dressed head to toe in camouflage, carrying a huge crossbow and wearing a headlamp, busted out of the foliage and was coming right for the car. He has this manic look in his eyes that just made me want to escape this even more, and I reversed as quickly as I could and peeled out of there. We didn't stop driving for a while. Even though we never saw him following us after we drove off, we both couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer and we went back to our houses, but I still constantly think about how quickly he got to us. If we hadn't sprinted right when we did, he would have caught us as we were getting into the car. I literally slammed my door about a second before he came barreling out of the woods towards us. Plus, the fact that there are no houses nearby. This person was waiting in the woods in full hunting gear with a weapon. And we clearly weren't animals as we had a flashlight. And there was a no trespassing sign in sight. The whole area around this graveyard is state park. I go out into the woods and into weird places in the night a lot, and I've seen some stuff I would consider supernatural that really scared me. But none of those things ever truly made me afraid to go into the woods like he did. I still go out on my own, but I never let my guard down like I used to. So, this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work from home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life. I matched with this random girl that we'll call Annie. I can't remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, and to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing, not to mention my own beliefs are more metaphorical. But that doesn't mean I'm close to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having an LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, okay, wow. That's either very specific or very broad, but hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed this was a place where one recovers from Scientology, but I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist. I didn't get an answer. We only met for an hour to have coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if we had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird. Like they were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and my dumbass didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kept forgetting to do it. I've since Googled it and can't find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish I'd done that sooner. There were, however, other things that stuck out. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel dumb. She wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for lack of asking. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she had said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird as heck. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And, okay, I did think this was weird, but, like, she's from California. I don't know, maybe that's kind of normal. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up. Reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on your ancestors. She told me she didn't think she had any past lives and was a new soul, which didn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural element she placed on herself was strange, but I know a lot of people want to feel special. That didn't mean I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined. As I was telling this story, I could tell Annie was conflicted. Like she wanted to agree but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I did not want a teacher. Her response was very mirroring, and I'm not a moron. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me, that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and I told myself that she was probably just nervous. I have a strong personality. I'm very independent, so I can understand if somebody wouldn't want to go up against the things I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be more chill. Yeah, that was a big mistake. So I go to this thing. Immediately, it's weird, guys. Immediately. The second I step foot in that house, I'm uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent. Everybody's looking at me. I'm laughing and saying hi, and no one is like really responding. And here I am, awkwardly dropping my keys and phone, while everyone is just watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room, and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there. I was curious. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is like leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to like shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was uncomfortable by that point, so I shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So, spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. Everybody introduces themselves and are their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I'm ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me. That was the only question we got asked about ourselves beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD ass can't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I do not understand. How can anyone with actual attention issues listen to past trills and deep noise breathing? So I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and barely paying attention, because I can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think of anything we'd want to ask her or need from her, and that got my attention. What the heck did I need to ask her? Other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and don't see a single one. Once the meditation ended, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were. She was like, "In the kitchen on the table where the snacks tend to be." I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor. I laughed and played along with, "Oh, alright, I think I'll find them." Literally, she was deadpan, unsmiling. And then walked away. So stupid me thought she just might be like that, but then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Annie and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was very weird. I was so uncomfortable I wanted to get up and go, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this damn activity. The activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think of something we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That's stuff I would only ever do with my therapist. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious. But because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her being a lighthouse or some sort of guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual, other than the leader. They were both running it. Suddenly, it occurred to me. as it probably did to y'all already, that Annie had just been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net. And I had this big realization in a handful of seconds. It made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done, but I couldn't get up, because people were sharing their experiences and stuff, pouring their hearts out. This was the most messed up part of it, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down. Then they can quote-unquote save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain they just inflicted. But that isn't the fault of people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them. Like people were crying on top of my shoes that I left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask somebody to pass them to me. Finally, I got up and told everyone I had to go to the car, then took off. I texted Annie and told her I wouldn't be back and that I hope she found her people. Just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't know you beyond a name. Annie, let's not meet under any circumstances, please. And if y'all ever hear the term neurodivinity, run. If ADHD made me divine, then I'd be on my 94th incarnation by now. Hey folks, I'm kind of new and this is the first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify that this didn't happen only to me, but to my uncle too. This was after the Christmas Eve party, when everybody went home. I decided to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs into the woods next to a park, went out to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him not to do that because it was too dark out there. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. He didn't care much and he went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with them. Once there, anything wrong seemed to happen, everything was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having a relaxing walk, and I wasn't really paying attention to the surroundings when suddenly the dogs went still. This wasn't that strange. They always stopped on their way to stare and bark at other animals they noticed, like rats or birds, even insects or other dogs. However, this time was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed something that was going wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious, they were actually kind of nervous, anxious, or afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We didn't see how many because of the darkness, but they were saying something. We all gather here, by the blood of incomprehensible, we incomprehensible, the in thy incomprehensible, etc. As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his head back and he only saw a slight movement of branches and shrubs, perhaps because these people were trying to hide. After all that happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near these woods, nor when it gets dark. So, to the strangers in the woods, let's not meet. I haven't posted an experience in some years, but this one happened recently. I was behind the scenes at the restaurant I was working at, waiting to clock in for my shift. That's when I first noticed her. Starboat Girl. This chick loves that gothic kids movie about the blue-haired girl and the button-eyed doll. The clothing associated with the marketing of the movie is always a dark blue bow with silver stars. Now, when I'm not at work in our dress code, I'm usually goth or close to it. I enjoy looking more like a rock star than wearing just jeans. And yes, I own jeans too. I just prefer to wear darker clothes, so I immediately noticed this girl because of her bow. I remember that movie, even though I'm an adult. So I make a mental note that, maybe this chick is alternative too, and I might get along well with her. Fast forward to a few weeks later, now everyone else avoids this girl. I notice, but figure people are being mean. I admit she is kind of weird, but weird never scared me, so when she starts to say hi, I politely say hi back. I pick up a shift on a day I don't normally work, and she's there waiting to clock in. After exchanging greetings, she starts to engage and we talk a little bit. I like to joke a bit at work, so I say something kind of edgy and she laughs. And I clock in and that was it. I didn't notice until later, but I never used to work with her. I mean, barely. We work in different areas of the restaurant, so it was whatever it was, and I don't really think anything about it until one day. I'm at my lunch in the break room, which is quite a walk from our restaurant to get to, and more like a bungalow that is attached behind the property. I am sitting at one of 6 tables. Each table has 2 chairs. Starbo sits right across from me. I look up for my chips and dip, and there is no one else in there but her and me. She asks, "Can I have a chip? I forgot to bring a snack for my break." At first I'm thinking I don't like to share my own food with people I don't know. I'm just not raised that way, so my instinct is to say no, but she flashes up the doe eyes and I crumble. "Yeah, sure," I reply. She scoots my dip out of my hands and under her chin and proceeds to grab fist after fistful of my chips and chow down. It's like a movie scene. It actually made me sick. I'll spare you the details, but this chick double dips, slops, and belches. Yeah, no thank you. My food is done. I am not eating after that. I make up an excuse to head back to our location. I'm pretty upset, but at the end of the day, it's my fault. I mean, I said she could have some. I feel like she guilted me into it. Never again, I tell myself. A week later, click, clock in for my shift. Guess who is standing behind me? Starboat girl. She doesn't normally work today. I don't normally get anxious, but she's making me feel that way. I avoid saying hi and duck out to my area to work. On my break, here she comes. She is walking behind me and says something about spending break together, and I say, "No, you go on. I gotta use the toilet." And I fast walk towards the bathroom. At lunch, I'm not so lucky. Plops down at my table. The room is virtually empty. Maybe one guy half asleep in the back. I'm on my phone scrolling and eating my TV dinner. She asks if I'm having a good day. At first I completely ignore her. Then she gets louder. I say something bland like, "Just hanging in there." I was in the middle of my meal and my box from it was still sitting on the table. I'm quiet, ignoring her, playing on my phone or pretending to. Starbo starts picking up my trash and reading it. I'm taken aback. "What are you doing?" I say. She slowly says in a casual kind of way, "Just curious, what you're eating." I am so upset. I want to do something, but something she can't get me fired for. I start talking about really macabre and Debbie Downer stuff, anything I can think of. I tell her my opinions on canceled forensic shows and Armageddon, tragic accidents, and everything I could do to put a bitter taste in her mouth. I figure this girl is too weird for my blood and too creepy even for me to have a friendship with. I'm overly excited about my newfound rise to turn this girl off that as I'm talking I finish my food and a noodle goes down the wrong pipe. Great. Now I'm choking. I'm freaking choking. This girl might be the last person I ever see. I can't believe it. She turns to me and says chillingly, her eyes turning dark, "You're going to die from that." More determined now to live than my thinly little gothic mind ever was, I tell myself, "Find water," and I will myself over to the water cooler halfway across the break room. Luckily we had paper cups which sometimes ran out. I chug water and cough and gasp, and finally, and obviously because I'm typing this, I survived. But I am fuming angry at Starbo. This chick wouldn't even get me water. I get it, I was turning her off, but this whole thing started because she was stalking me. I grab my stuff and go to my supervisor and report it. My supervisor is so lax. Says the company can't do anything. That she is within her rights to be around me. I keep avoiding her. The last time I saw her, she came up behind me before she clocked in and stabbed me with her pointer finger in my back. Smiled at me when I turned around to see who it was, and ran to go clock into her area for her shift. Now she works the same shifts as I do. I think she changed her availability to be near me. I also think she has been getting breaks and lunches close to mine, so she can come hunt me down in her breaks. I really don't know what to do besides report her or make up an excuse again to leave if she finds me. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages, following nothing but a map and a compass. No GPS allowed. It is a teamwork experience, and you camp and overcome hurdles together. Anyways, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out of the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like what I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods in a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s, early 80s, very pale with liver spots dotting his face, and a gray/white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes in those weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though. That absolutely puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking him if he was okay. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk and then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the man. After about a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us still, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold on to anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it is hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. I and my uncle looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us that he needed our help. His friend was in major trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that he would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come to the slope right now or we would regret it. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin had gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car. All the while my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was a possibly mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets and stuff. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed to the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. I had to think about it, but I believe this happened in the 6th grade. It's hard for me to believe that this took place 20 years ago. One thing I don't remember is what our science project was exactly. All I know is that I got partnered up with this kid in my class named Brian. He seemed like a chill kid at school. He was chubby, quiet, and kind of shy even. When I went to his house to work on our project for the first time, he was apparently much more comfortable and seemed to be very outgoing. He made jokes and laughed a lot more than usual. Kept saying stuff to his mom in Spanish, and then they would both laugh at me. But I never thought it was really that mean, and I would laugh along, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Usually right afterwards, he would tell me what they had supposedly said. At one point, we were in his room, and he asked me to go ask his mom for a line of paper. I told him I didn't speak Spanish and he should go ask her, but he said he would just tell me how to say it. I don't remember exactly, but he told me to say something like it. So I went and asked his mom. I knew something was off right away just by the way she looked at me, like I had said something crazy. She grabbed my hand and walked me to the bathroom like I was a special little boy. Once we were in the bathroom, she pointed at the toilet paper with that confused look still on her face as if to say, "Where the heck else would it be?" I was confused and could only speak to her in English while she spoke to me in Spanish, and we didn't understand each other. Soon we heard Brian having a hilarious laughing fit from the other room. Laughing so hard like he thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I was pretty sure it was only kind of funny. I wasn't worried though, and I laughed it off. Haha, you got me. Eventually, he became really excited to show me something. He told me he'd be right back, and then he ran out of his room. He was gone for a minute or so and then returned, telling me to follow him. He was so sure that I was going to love whatever he was about to show me, so I was excited too. Couldn't wait. We get outside, and he goes to this little shed and pulls out a lawnmower. He tells me to follow him. He started the mower, began walking, and then gestured with his hand again for me to follow him. As we walked, we rounded a corner, and there on the ground was a net full of frogs. There were maybe 20 or more frogs in there. I didn't have time to stop him. Right before it happened, we looked at each other. Him looking at me to make sure I was looking, and me looking at him in pure confusion. He pulled back on the mower, raising the blades, and then let the weight of the spinning blades fall down on the writhing pile of frogs. The mower bogged down just for a split second, and there was a sickening wet crunching sound, followed by chunks being spit everywhere as he raised the blades back up. He raised the blades and let them fall on the pile of frogs 4 or 5 times. All the while he was staring at my face and laughing maniacally at my horrified reaction. He released the bar and the mower went silent as he crumpled to the ground and began rolling around on the grass laughing. A couple of frogs escaped without getting blended. A few more frantically scattered away from the mower, missing limbs. I awkwardly laughed with him and played along like nothing bad had just happened. I never get disgusted to the point of throwing up, and it's hard to disgust me at all. But from that point, I definitely knew there was something wrong with Brian. And until now, I've never told anyone. I wouldn't say that I was afraid. It was just that I didn't think it was a good idea to tell anybody what had happened. Not his mom and not my friends. Not my parents, not my brother or sister or best friend. I didn't tell anyone anything about it, and Brian never did anything like that again or mentioned it. It was the weirdest thing. They say it's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for. I haven't seen him since 6th grade ended, but sometimes I wonder just what kind of person he turned out to be. I've never been a girl who has scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, and stuff. However, a night in March 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me, while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college's music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we would probably be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are in the practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff all of the time. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy about 5'7", maybe 5'8", wearing a thin blonde curly wig, the Groucho Marx glasses / nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. Then this guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problems at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friends and I booked it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we are leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," with my name. Of course, we go to the campus police department immediately, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you." I tell him what happened and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time a stack of CDs from various violinists was sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time they were outside my door. All the while the campus security is doing nothing. Some people even suggested that I should enjoy the attention. Things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether, when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago when I moved back to the same town. The first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to. Insert violinist name here." I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there is a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formerly known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying. until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice in daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn, leading to the seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flooded through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of driveways they like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively. Not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down, looking back at me straight into my eyes like he had been looking at me long before I looked to him. He was a young man, maybe 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was turned completely towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straight forward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt, laughing at our antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road, but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed two black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little bit. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn and flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around, and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not going to lie, that freaked us out. And the return of one truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous. Probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666 and upside-down crosses. Marks of other, more ballsy teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods. Courtesy of who knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25 probably, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy. But more normally. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our stuff. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do who knows what to us. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the heck just happened. Came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities. Like the rumors say, what were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we have no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since, and I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out my head, and this was over a year ago now. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this particular night, had found myself stuck downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop. I looked at the bus schedule and realized I may have missed the last bus of the night, unless it was late. I decided to wait on the bench. Moments later, a tall man walked up and sat right next to me. There was plenty of space to sit elsewhere for him, but he huddled up nice and close. He was wearing all black, including a black leather jacket. He started making smooth conversation with me, and I finally looked over at him. He was very tan and had shiny wavy black hair and orange eyes, like bright hazel orange, snake-looking eyes, which contrasted with his dark features and clothes. He really looked like the devil in person to me. He took off his leather jacket and laid it across my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and handed it back to him and said no thanks. He kept draping it back on my lap. I looked around for other people and only saw a passed out homeless person sleeping on the bench. He was trying to coerce me into getting a ride with him because it's so late and he was worried about me. And my bus isn't coming, I'm not safe. I said, no thanks, my bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would be here at all. The streets were dead and dark, and I was scared to leave the only spot that was well lit. After what seemed like an eternity, my bus finally came. It was the most beautiful bus I'd ever seen. I quickly got up and said, my bus is here. He sneered at the bus and said under his breath, you got lucky. I got on the bus and saw out the window him walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from where the stop was. He stood next to his car waving at me to come to him, as if that would change my mind. It obviously did not. I was a wild teen that partied a lot and would stay downtown all hours of the night and thought I was invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out that late again, especially alone. I really did get lucky and had no intention of pushing it again. I went to school in New Orleans from 2010 to 2012, and I encountered the scariest man I've ever known while attending. My friend from high school and I both lived there at the time. We met up to smoke a small joint on the outskirts of a nearby park. She was struggling heavily with money, for both tuition and everything else, and I was smoking her out for a pick-me-up. While smoking, a man emerged from a white house across the street from the park, one of the nice Garden District homes. He carried his bike over his shoulder and was headed straight for us. We quickly put out our joint when we saw his eyes locked on us, and we initiated friendly conversation. He introduced himself as Ty. He was tan with piercing blue eyes, probably in his late 30s, and seemed pretty athletic. We asked if the nice house was his, and he said he was staying with his friends. He ran back and retrieved 2 beers for us, both unopened, so we accepted. This was a poor choice, but he was insistent. We were already pretty high, and we were a little afraid that he would screw us over if we said no. He pulled out a ring of cards while telling us how he was a model, refusing to tell us what exactly he'd done in the past. The cards all seemed pretty worn and old, but he insisted that they were his press passes. He noticed immediately that I was asking some overly specific questions, and it was pretty uncomfortable, while my friend, much more trusting, was enthralled. He latched onto her, telling her that he was doing a shoot in New Orleans for the Saints, working for ESPN. She would be paid, he said, and saw her light up upon hearing this. Her phone was off, so she told me to give him my number to communicate. I was pretty mad at this point. He kept making backhanded comments intended to make me feel like the outsider for questioning him. It's not for everyone. This is how you make it in this world with a pretty face. And things of that nature. Putting on a show of fawning over my friend. Sociopaths tend to single people out like that, I learned. I soon heard from him on a daily basis. He would ask how his little lady was doing, my friend. Ask for her Facebook and ask for her class schedule, and I told him that I doubted she would be okay with that. She would have been, but she was playing a dangerous game, so I tried to intercept his advances. He found me on Facebook soon enough, though my information was not linked to my number, and I was receiving messages constantly asking for my friend. I thought that if I blocked him, he would continue to hunt me down in crazier ways, or tell somebody about the weed. Young and stupid. So I allowed the barrage of messages. I refused to help him and made my friends aware that he was starting to scare me. I was leaving town with my friend a few months later for Christmas, and told him the week before we actually left that we were both gone indefinitely. As his messages got more and more aggressive as time went on, he freaked out, but it seemed like he would leave me alone in the end. However, every time I went to the park, which was daily in my last week because I was smoking a ton of pot after finals, just keeping it real here, I would see him on his bike, circling the track around the park. I didn't think much of it, nor did I think he could see me because I was with a group and away from the track, and he never acknowledged anyone being there. The day before we actually left, I received several blurry images of the original friend and me lying in the grass on the different days we came together, which wasn't every time I was there. It was obvious that we were smoking pot, so again, young and foolish, we didn't go to the cops. When I got back to my dorm on the same day, placed on the sidewalk by the back entrance I always used, which was rarely trafficked, was an ESPN press pass with the name Tyler Durden, piercing blue eyes staring up at me. It was like it had been laid right in the center of the walkway. That was probably the most frightening moment of my life, and I packed up and stayed with friends until my flight out. I received phone calls from numbers I didn't have throughout Christmas, making my life miserable. Every sound in my house I feared would be him, finding me at the address with my name attached to it. He was livid, texting in all caps from various numbers that I was a little liar, that I was just a stoner and I was never model material and I was jealous of my smoking friends, implying that he knew of more than just one of my friends. That liars get raped and he would destroy my pothead life. And he'd go into really weirdly worded babbling rants that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was scared to tell anyone in my life. I was the good kid who had gotten herself into the stupidest situation. I just hoped he would move on. A week before I was supposed to go back to school, he just stopped. From daily rampages and rants to nothing. I was so relieved until in February I checked my email to find a crime alert warning students of a serial rapist going by Tyler Durden, who lured women to his home, gave them alcohol and assaulted them. His real name is Dean Kelly. A has-been model from an Aerosmith video, baiting, stalking, and assaulting underage girls at schools in Chicago, Texas, and New Orleans. He keeps making it out of jail on bail and contacting his victims, pretending to be other victims who want to talk. Thankfully, I'm not one of them. Screw this guy. I still live in fear years later. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty normal, semi-rural suburb of a major US city. When this started in 1997, I was 6. My brother was 3 and my half-sister was 18. My sister made the dean's list at her university her first 2 semesters, so we went out to dinner to celebrate. The 5 of us, along with my grandparents, went to a seafood restaurant chain in a nearby city. It was connected to a mall and our table was by a window that looked out into the hallway of the mall. Shortly after ordering, I looked up from my coloring to see a woman staring in the window at us. She had long, stringy, mousy-colored hair, big glasses, and a longish olive green coat. She made me nervous from the get-go. Next time I looked up, she was no longer in the hallway of the mall, but in the restaurant. She was standing at the host stand, ignoring the host's questions about how many people she would be dining with. She was still staring at our table. Eventually, she requested to be seated at the bar, where she could still see our table. I finally pointed out to my grandmother that somebody was staring at us. She pointed it out to the waiter, and he said that unfortunately there wasn't much that he could do unless she actually harassed us. So we finished our meal uneasily, all of us aware that this woman was staring. After dinner, we walked around the mall. The woman followed us into American Eagle, which at the time wasn't so teenager-oriented, and that could have been coincidental. But afterwards, she followed us into Limited Too, a clothing store for young girls. She didn't look at any of the clothing, just my mom, brother, sister, and me. My mom told an employee that the woman had been following us and she left the store. She sat on a bench outside and watched us while we purchased clothing for me. She followed us the rest of the evening, never going into the stores after us, just throughout the mall. My dad, who had been pretty nonchalant about the issue at the beginning, finally was getting creeped out and we left. A few weeks later, I saw this same woman in a car outside of my summer daycare. I began to cry and told the aide that the woman had followed us around the mall. The aide went up to the woman and asked her to leave or she would call the cops. We had on occasion had other creeps watch the daycare's playground and the cops had to be called. Then she came to our church. It was almost September at this point, with these events starting in June. She attended one service, sitting on the opposite side of the congregation area from where we were. There were 3 sections of pews, one straight out from the pulpit and stage, and 2 on the sides at a 45-degree angle from the stage. My family was on one side and she was on the other. We informed the pastor, and he targeted her in a very pastorally way, inviting her to new member classes, asking how she found out about the church, and what drew her to this church, etc. She apparently was fairly unresponsive and never showed up again. We didn't see her again for a few years, at least not in any way that was as obvious as it was in 1997. My sister swears she saw the woman on her university's campus a few times her sophomore year, 1997 to 1998. My mom and dad thought they saw her at a local music festival in the summer of 1999. I thought she was in a museum while on a school field trip in 1999. Started crying and was basically told I was imagining things by my teacher. In 2001, she showed up again. Every year, the Girl Scouts had a big slumber party at my elementary school. All of the Brownie and Junior troops had dinner, played games, had events, worked on badges, and had a big sleepover in the gym. The elementary school I went to had these gates that closed off sections of the school, I assume for security reasons. The offices, gym, cafeteria, and health room were all on one end of the L-shaped building. The rest of the school was closed off to us by a locked gate. I walked out of the gym and looked down the hallway into the locked part, and a few classrooms down there was a janitor. It wasn't just a random after-hours janitor though, it was the woman. I bursted into tears and ran and hid in the bathroom until my troop leader called my mom. She picked me up and took me home. On Monday morning, my mom inquired about the woman with the school. It turns out that she had been hired as an after-hours janitor by the district about a year prior. She had worked at a different school for about a year before transferring to my elementary school, a few weeks back before I saw her. My mom told the school about the incidents in the late 1990s, and the school seemed skeptical. I ended up getting cast in the school play for a few weeks later, and would be at school after hours, so same time as this woman. She was often at the gate, staring into the gym, watching our rehearsals. She must have started at 4 p.m. since she was never actually in the gym, only on the other side of the gate, and that's when they shut the gates. I told the director that the woman was watching, having realized that people thought the stalking aspect of this was a figment of my imagination. The director did tell the school they saw the woman on the security camera watching us, rather than doing her job, and fired her. They informed my mom that the woman was fired as well. Once again, it all stopped in any obvious ways. I was driving with my dad one day and saw her in a car in 2002. My brother saw her at the park that his Boy Scout troop had an event in once. My sister saw her at the restaurant she worked at in 2002, as well, and refused to serve her, getting a coworker to do so. She said the woman never stopped staring at her. It stopped again until 2008. I was 18 and was at Culver's, a Wisconsin-based fast food and custard chain, with my boyfriend. We were at a table eating when the woman walked in. He visibly froze, just as I did. Apparently, his family had the same issue with the woman that we did. There were a few instances of her actually stalking them. His dad owned a restaurant for a time, and she would come in and ask people about the owner's kids, but refused to talk to the owner or would go silent if he approached. For them, this started in 2000 when he was 8-ish and his sisters were 5 and 1. Like my family, they saw the woman in the background for years, including at the elementary school that we both went to. This means that at least 2 families independently complained about this woman, and the school did nothing about it for months, even though she had allegations of stalking at least 4 students. We promptly left the restaurant. She didn't notice us, presumably because we are 16 and 18, pretty grown up with their crazy hair and piercings and skinny jeans. But she'd followed both of our families around, just watching from the background for years. I can't help but wonder how many other families she followed like that too. I'll never know what this man's intentions were, but I am thankful I listened to my gut anyways, even if it took me a hot minute to smarten up. At the time that this happened, I didn't think much of it until looking back on it from the perspective of an adult more mature and wiser. Now, as I revisit the memory of this encounter, I am convinced something more sinister was at play, but I'll never know for sure. I was 17, and as teenagers tend to be, a lot less cautious than a young girl of my age ought to be, in a new country completely foreign to her. I was on vacation with my family to escape the cold winter weather up north. My parents were very liberal about giving me the breathing room I desired, and I wasted no opportunity to use that to my advantage, as much as I was afforded. It was a family resort and nobody was all that concerned about anything happening. We all had our vacation blinders on, so to speak. Every night after the sun went down, I liked to wander off to the pool to swim and soak in the hot tub, while my parents stayed in their rooms. When you're basking in the lap of luxury at a high-end resort, you don't think about the potential for danger. In hindsight, I suppose this is why tourists are considered ideal targets for predatory activity. Being on vacation made me more sociable and, additionally, more trusting than I normally would be. I admit that the false security that came from being within the illusory security of this protected resort caused me to lower my guard substantially. The fact that I'd already been going to and from the pool area by myself every night, with no incident thus far, only heightened my cavalier nonchalance. While my parents gave me the breathing room to enjoy my independence, I was here to make friends and have a good time. I didn't care about much else. So, just like any other night during my stay, I was lounging in the hot tub, chattering amongst the guests, all of my worries completely forgotten for the moment. I was getting a lot of attention, mainly because it was apparent that I was Canadian, and all the guests amongst me were apparently fascinated by this. I was barraged with questions, some of which I could not decipher whether they were genuine or trolling. Yes, we do have heat and electricity up north. I kid you not, I was actually asked this. Amongst this group of people, I was particularly invested in this conversation I was having with a much older man, who came off as nothing but warm and friendly. He had claimed he too was on vacation with his family, but they were nowhere to be seen. In fact, he, not including me of course, was the only one who seemed to not know anyone there. Everybody else was with their families. I figured that was normal enough. However, because I too was vacationing with my family, and they were nowhere in sight either. What strikes me as odd, however, is how he seemed to be engaging only me in conversation and ignoring everybody else. He was nearly 3 times my age. Doesn't help matters. As the night progressed, People began retreating to their rooms, leaving just me, this man and a few others. It was around this time that he shared with me what room he was staying at before asking, innocently, where I was staying. Foolishly told him, but only the sectional area. Although he had asked which room specifically, I had enough sense to not divulge that much. Things didn't take a particularly unsettling turn until I began to notice how eerily quiet things had become. There was still some people around, but it was just me and him in the hot tub now. I took this as my cue to start heading back. Bidding him goodbye, I got up to leave, but he instantly stopped me, insisted that he walk me back to my room, as it's not safe for a pretty little thing like me to be wandering around the resort by myself at this late hour of the night. I took this with concern akin to a protective uncle, but waved off the supposed hospitality, insisting I would be alright. He became more persistent, switching from concerned guardian to fear-mongerer. He told me how bad things happen to young girls like me without an escort. As he droned on about the dangers that might surely befall me as a young female on vacation, with no parents around to guard me, a small defenseless young girl, I felt the first wave of unease wash over me. I shook it off and smiled warmly, telling him thank you, but that I would manage fine on my own. He seemed to deflate as his expression became more exasperated. At least let me walk you part of the way there until I know you're safe. This puzzled me. If there were predators lurking, how would I be any safer walking from the halfway point than from where I was now, besides it being a shorter trek? Nevertheless, this show of concern was beginning to wear me down. He had gotten me thinking about how dark it was now, and the vulnerable position I was in. He was right, kind of. I practically had a target on my back. Okay. I nodded after a moment of hesitation. I was young and naive and thought it to be an advantage to have somebody bigger and stronger walk with me. I knew I was incredibly foolish and a sheltered teenager, with far too much faith in humanity as a whole. Very unlike the cynical and distrustful woman I am now who always follows her gut. I also, as annoyingly typically as this sounds, did not want to be rude. Fortunately, I have since grown out of my people-pleasing complex and will not hesitate to say no when I feel weird at the first sign of a red flag, but I had yet to develop this quality then. I hesitantly relented. At the moment, my fear of coming off as rude to an adult overrode that of any subconscious or otherwise concern I had for my safety. His eyes lit up and he nodded approvingly. Good. Let's get going then. It's late and your parents will worry. I ignored the twisting in my gut and rose from the hot tub, shivering from the sudden exposure of the cold air. Suddenly feeling too exposed, I hastily fastened my towel around myself, padded towards the lockers. At this point, I was just determined to get back to safety and warmth of my hotel room. It was only as I was getting closer to leaving that I began to get this sinking feeling in my stomach that something about this whole night just wasn't right. My suspicions were further affirmed as I took note of my escort following me. The lockers were outside and the women's changing room was to the left of them. I was going to retrieve my clothes from the locker, change in the locker room, and then go. With this complete stranger who I didn't know at all. I noticed he was standing a little too closely now, and I instinctively shrunk away from him. This definitely wasn't right, but it wasn't until I was shakily pulling my top on over my soaked bikini top, having already decided I would skip the locker room, which regrettably accented my womanly curves a little bit more than I was comfortable with at the moment, and which he seemed to notice as well, that I decided I could not wander off with this strange man that I hardly knew. Any last bit of false security had waned away the moment I felt his eyes on me, watching me dress, his eyes clearly appraising my body. I shivered again, this time not from the cold. As I pulled on the rest of my clothes, I had already made my decision. You know, I really appreciate you offering to walk me back, but I think I'll manage after all. Thank you, though. He grew solemnly quiet, which stirred a growing sense of malaise within me as I began to feel more and more validated in my decision to not go off with this man. Are you sure? He pressured. I would hate for anything to happen to you. I nodded more insistently and forced a smile. Nah, it's alright, I'll be fine, thanks. Okay, he said quietly as I practically started running for the exit. While still in earshot behind me, I heard him say, You be careful now. You never know who might be out there. As soon as I was out of sight, I began bolting and was stopped in my tracks, instantly by the second wave of impending dread to hit me that night. I decided against walking back on foot and headed towards the on-resort shuttle instead. On the way, on 2 separate occasions within the space of no more than 10 minutes, 2 older men in their 50s made a pass at me. And at the shuttle stop, a group of men in a car offered to give me a ride, but I ended up making it back to safety from the shuttle without any further incident. Later, I wrote it off as paranoia and convinced myself that he really was just a hospital older man with a young girl's best interest at heart. And now that I know from personal experience how the men that seem the nicest with seemingly good intentions can often be the worst predators, I am convinced I made the right decision that night. So this happened a few months ago. My best friend P and I had just gotten out of school. We decided to get ice cream after school, and before we know it, it's 6 p.m. We leave the ice cream shop, which happens to be right next to the liquor store. Small city. We notice this shady guy standing outside the store, and we try to brush it off, but there's just something not right about him. A woman leaves the liquor store, and she's dressed nicely in a dress and heels. She starts walking, and before we know it, the guy starts following her. My friend and I get concerned, so we decide to tail him a little bit to make sure he doesn't have any bad intentions. Things escalate when we realize that he's filming this woman and she has no idea. It's disgusting. He's following her and has his phone out trying to get a better video of what's under her skirt. P and I look at each other and have a mutual understanding. We know we have to do something, so we take a deep breath and somehow manage to put ourselves between the woman and the man. We hear him curse, but we don't dare turn around. We are spread apart, making sure there's no way he can get her on film. Mind you, we're both 5'1", 17-year-old girls. Our hearts are racing, but we don't move away until the woman safely enters a restaurant, which is about 2 blocks away. She's in the restaurant, but this guy does not want to give up. He's waiting outside for her. He's lingering and even tries to peer inside through a window. P and I know we have to tell the woman what's going on, just in case he tries something. So we step inside this fancy restaurant and spot the woman on a date with her boyfriend. Tap her on the shoulder and I fill her in. She's shocked that he followed her for 2 blocks and that she had no idea. I let her know that he's waiting outside and give her his description, just in case he follows her anywhere else. She thanks us profusely and even gives us a hug. P and I leave the restaurant feeling relieved because we both know that we cannot live with ourselves if something were to happen to her. I'm a 22-year-old female and come from the US, but am currently living in Germany for a work study. I am traveling alone, but I am fluent in German and I've always been fairly confident in my ability to live alone and defend myself, considering I stand at about 5'11" and carry 3 different forms of self-defense on me at all times. I've been here for a little over a month and I absolutely love everything about it, besides this experience of course. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago. After exploring my semi-large home city in Germany for a few weeks, I wanted to check out a nearby country. I've always been jealous of how Europeans can travel. Countries like Americans can travel from state to state, and my dad generously offered to pay for my travels while I'm living here. So I wanted to take advantage of that and experience a different culture. After doing lots of research, I decided upon the Netherlands. I've always been curious about Dutch culture, and I was very excited to do some more exploring, even if just for a weekend. I chose a small city in the south of the Netherlands, so I only traveled about 4.5 hours to get there. I had some lovely Dutch food and got to experience the Saturday market in the city center, which was filled with local goods. Now for the juicy part. On my last day in the Netherlands, I decided to check out a local Dutch coffee shop. Most of you probably know, but some Dutch coffee shops sell weed for recreational use and have areas where you can smoke and talk to people. Since I've never been to anything like this before, I was super excited and nervous. I smoke relatively frequently back home, so I wasn't going into this completely blind though. When I walked in, I had to register for an account, and the staff took my picture and passport and gave me an account number. I was a little uneasy about this, considering I didn't want my passport and a coffee club account to go hands in hand, but I've heard that several coffee shops do this, so I wasn't super worried. I then went to the counter and bought the weakest strain they had, White Widow I think, which is definitely not considered weak in the US. Also, it was like 5 for half a gram, so that was pretty damn fantastic. I didn't want to bring the bud across borders because I didn't want to risk getting torn in half by the German police, so I decided I'd find someone to smoke with and grab a train afterwards. It was only about 1:30 p.m. as I made my way to the chill zone, a hazy room filled with foreigners and locals, all ripping bongs and dragging blunts. Amongst quite a few 20-something-year-old men, I see 2 girls sitting alone at a table for 4, and I ask if I can join. They happily oblige and we start chatting. They introduced themselves as Alex and Jen. Both of them were Germans, and when I mentioned that I'm from the US, they got super excited, started gushing about how awesome California must be, to which I've never even been. Not even after a minute that I'm talking to Alex and Jen, some lanky, freaky looking boy looks over from a different table and says, "Oh, you're from the US? We were just talking about how we wish we could afford to travel there." Immediately after saying this, he sits down across from me, despite the fact that nobody invited him to. Looks-wise, this guy appeared to be anywhere between 25 and 30, relatively scraggly with big hazed-over brown eyes, shaggy brown hair, and a very large mouth, which was always slightly ajar. Though he was slightly unkempt, he seemed relatively normal, despite inviting himself to pop a squat with us. This lurky boy starts asking us normal questions. Where we are from, where we work, how do you like the Netherlands, and stuff. The way he spoke was slightly slurred though, as if he had been drinking, but I couldn't smell alcohol on him, and he didn't seem drunk. He was consistently hard to understand, with an accent that was possibly Dutch. For a moment, I thought he might have a mental disability, so I didn't want to be rude to him and say I couldn't understand him. It also occurred to me that he might just be attempting to flirt and failing miserably, so I didn't really see him as a threat. I mostly nodded at what he said or threw in a yeah for sure, here or there, while Alex and Jen were relatively quiet. Something about him was off-putting to me. I just couldn't figure out what it was. After a few minutes of barely coherent conversation, Alex asks this guy if he can roll us a joint since none of us know how to. He says yes and offers to grind our bud. We give him the go-ahead and he suddenly takes all of it and leaves the chill zone to grind it at the bar. This is where I started to get concerned. Tons of people in the chill zone had grinders right in front of them, and there was no reason for him to leave to grind our weed. I began to worry he might put something in it. Alex and Jen both admit that it freaks them out too, and I decide to keep an eye on him through the glass door, though he had his back to us. I'm closely watching him when he turns around and gives me this wide toothy smile, almost like he was laughing. I instantly got the chills. He continued to stare directly at me, smiling, as he spent 10 minutes grinding our bud. This guy wanders back in and hands each of us our small bags of bud and then grabs a paper to start rolling. I am not shitting you when I say that he took 30 minutes to roll one loose, horrible joint. His hands were shaking the entire time, almost violently. I started to wonder if he was on something else. The joint immediately falls apart and he asks Alex, who was sitting directly next to him, to lick it and fix it. He's smiling and staring intently at her as she's about to lick it, and she says, "You really don't have to watch me do it, you know." He responds again with some incoherent jibber-jabber as I turn to the girls sitting behind me and ask if they could roll a joint for me. They do so in less than a few minutes. The crappy joint falls apart about 3 more times, and we decide to just smoke the one that the girls rolled, as we all wanted this guy to get the heck away from us at this point. I come up with a half-assed plan as we light it, and I say, "Hey, we appreciate you helping us, but these are my friends that I haven't seen since the last time I was in Germany, and we just really want to catch up and have some girl time." Seems nice enough. He responded with, "Well, you guys can talk with me right here. I don't have to leave." Alex immediately repeats the same thing I said, phrased a bit differently, and he says, I'm standing here. You can pretend you're alone and just talk with me here. At this point, alarm bells are starting to go off. Stu isn't leaving, and I can't think of anything to say to make him go. Jen has been quiet almost the whole time, staring at the table, but Alex is starting to realize that we really need to do something. Alex says to him, "Please, we don't want to be rude. We just haven't seen each other in so long, and we really want to catch up one-on-one." He aggressively shoots back with, "How did you all meet then? Where did you meet? In what city? Why are all of your friends?" And then directed at me, "Why were you in Germany, and where were you?" Dang. Now I need a real story, or at least one convincing enough to shoo him away. Say something along the lines of, "I was visiting this big city in Germany to find an apartment for my upcoming work study, and I met them in a pub. Started talking, realized we had a lot in common, and decided to stay in touch since I knew I wouldn't have a lot of friends when I moved here." Sounds legit. This guy nods and seems convinced enough. Alex immediately follows with, "So, can you please go back to your friends so we can talk?" He says yet again, "I don't need to leave for you all to talk." He then says we should start fresh and asks me and only me what my name is, while extending a shaking hand. Suddenly, every story I've read on here is rushing back to me, and I realize all the things I've done wrong. I told him where I work, live, where I'm from. Man, this isn't good. My name is my last saving grace. I blurt out a fake name. Trisha. He repeats my name, but doesn't tell me his. Now I've reached my limit. We tried being polite, but to no avail. We've spent over an hour dealing with this creepy dude, and we've all had enough of it. I look him dead in the eyes and sternly say, "You're making us uncomfortable. Please leave us alone." He leans in until he's only a few inches from my face, his eyes almost quivering, as he says in a quiet, low tone, "I know people at your work, people that are above you. You really don't want to mess with me, because I could ruin your life." As he says this, it's as though the slurring in his voice vanishes. I feel the blood draining from my face and my head starts tingling. I almost feel like I'm about to burst into tears or throw up. Maybe both. I grab my bag and say, "I'm going to leave. You're seriously making us feel weird, and I really don't want to talk to you anymore." And then the final blood-curdling comment from him, "I think we'll be on the same train. Now that I know where you live, I think it's time for me to go too." I rush outside in a panic, borderline hyperventilating, as Alex and Jen follow suit. We simultaneously say, "What the heck?" and hurry away from the coffee shop. We end up exchanging numbers and going our separate ways. Now for a slightly happier ending. After I sprinted to the train station, I realized that I had left my pre-marked bag at the coffee shop. I honestly hesitated, as I really didn't want to run into this guy again, but I really wanted my useless goodies, so I ran back. I stood outside, briefly explained to the security guard what happened and why I left so quickly, and he said, "We saw what happened and we kicked him out. So sorry for that. He's not allowed back here again," and handed me my bag. I honestly believe that without Alex and Jen there, things would have gone very differently. I think this dude had some seriously messed up intentions, and the only thing stopping him was the fact that we were all together. I came across this subreddit a few days ago and thought I'd share my experience. This happened to me back in 2005, right after I graduated from uni. I live in a small town near the outskirts of London. It's not creepy or out of the way or anything, but it can get quite deserted at night. The night in question, I and a bunch of mates were going to all get together and go down to Fabric in central London. I was getting ready to leave the house when my girlfriend Sarah called with a bit of a problem, prompting me to tell my friends that they should go on without me and I'll meet them there. I hopped on the bus and headed to hers. A few hours later, I'd helped her sort through her crisis and was thinking I'd better make a move on and head to the club. I asked if she wanted to come. Several times she insisted that she felt better and wanted to stay at home. Knowing better than to test her resolve, I left it at that and called a minicab. I was waiting for the cab at the front of the driveway when Sarah joined me for the wait. We were kissing when the car drove up. This was my first sign that something was wrong. We didn't hear him pull up because he was driving really slowly with the headlights off. The only reason he grabbed our attention was because he turned on his bright lights at us. It was an old cream-colored Mercedes station wagon. I ignored whatever apprehension I had because I thought I just had an overactive imagination. Okay, so he pulled up quietly. So what? Knowing what I do now, I'm so happy Sarah never agreed to come with me. I got in the cab and told a guy who was in his mid-40s that I wanted to head to Fabric in central London. He just nodded his head while looking into his driver's side wing mirror. I said, "Did you hear me, mate?" He nods again, this time also letting a yes slip out. "That's quite a fare," he said, all the while staring at the window. That's when I realized what he was staring at in his mirror. Sarah walking back up to the driveway. I was about to react when she got to the front door, but the cabbie beat me to it, turning and saying, "Can't have the little lady going on unescorted now, can we?" All manner of deviance out there. This threw me a bit as his whole behavior was off, but I also knew that's what I would have done had it been the other way around, and maybe this guy had kids himself. I decided to just talk to him, break the ice, and after about 5 minutes I felt at ease as we slipped into a familiar conversation. Football and women. It was all okay until he started telling me about his ex and best friends, how they had been hooking up behind his back, about how he kicked the ever-living shit out of his friend for it. Then he started fixating on his ex, saying how all women were whores and liars and were only out for themselves, that men are only there to pay off their debts and wants. He even tried to justify a time when he kicked the shit out of her, saying that men can't be excused for their actions if appropriately provoked. Then it got even weirder. He started talking to me about men, trans men, how he liked that they were the best of both worlds, that they were something he could fuck, but that they were also wired like men and not out to get you. Those she-men are tighter than a twisted screw. I like it when they bleed a little on my you-know-what. Though some ladies are mighty fine, like that ass of yours. He turned to stare at me through the mirror, almost testing my reaction. I'm man enough to say that I was freaking the heck out by this point, not only at the conversation, but at the fact that the mobile phone I'd forgotten to charge, it died halfway through its rant. Not one to show my fear, I asked him to stop off at an ATM so I could get cash out to pay him at the end of the journey. He agrees, and for a moment I feel like it's all going to be over in a second, when he says that before he does that, he needs to stop to take a piss. That's even better, I thought. I can sneak out when he's peeing and bolt off. He turned off the main road and went through a random residential area before we finally found ourselves going down a dirt road and heading towards the woods. "Mate, where the heck are we going? You can't take a pee anywhere," he replied, somewhere along the lines that it was safer in the woods. That's when I noticed it. This particular car had no unlock feature in the back, and a very quiet slow tug on the door handle revealed that the child lock was on. I was trapped. He stopped the car near the edge of the woods and turned and asked if I wanted to join him. I declined and said that I was in a hurry and asked him to hurry himself. This seemed to anger him and he slammed the door and vanished. I waited about 1 minute and tried to climb out the driver's side, but it was locked too, and I was scared that my movement had alerted the cabbie just outside. Having tried and failed to restart my phone, I looked around to see if he'd left a phone or some kind of device that I could communicate with, but nothing. After nearly 10 minutes had gone by, I worked myself up to smashing the windows, figuring that this was in no way a normal situation and that abnormal measures could be taken. Just as I was getting into position, I heard a loud crash. It sounded like a massive branch had just hit the leaves below. I froze, not moving a muscle, not even my lungs. I wanted to be able to hear everything just at that moment. As my ears slowly tuned in, I began to hear two very distinct sounds, but both in intervals. The first was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded more like birds flying through the trees all at once. The second was a squelching slam. The slam only occurred 3 times, whereas the rustling was quite often. Then silence again. I decided not to wait any longer. My imagination was going wild as to what those sounds were, and I just wanted to get away as fast as my legs could carry me. I used to be on the track team. I leaned back and thrust my legs out as hard as I could and kicked the backseat window through. It shattered and I wasted no time in shimmying through the broken window and outside. That's when it happened. My eyes focused in the dark and I began to see that the ground was littered all around me with clothes. children's clothes, and the odd toy. I was so busy looking around that I didn't notice him walk straight up to me from behind and grab me by the nape. He was obviously way stronger than me. "Where are you going, friend? I still need to take you down Central." I noticed his shirt was off. He was sweating profusely and was covered in dirt. And in his hands he had a knife. A full-on kitchen knife, and there was something on it. I said, "What the heck, man? What the heck are you doing?" He replied something to the effect that he had some foul traps out in the woods and was checking on them for game. He offered to show me, recognizing that if I went with him, it would probably be the last choice I make. I twisted my body as much as I could and punched him square in the face. I ran as fast as I could. He yelled after me, "See you soon." I ignored him and kept running. Even though we had driven quite far, at least 5 or 6 miles, I still legged it all the way back and straight to the cops and told them everything I remembered. They said they could go and check it out and send me home in a squad car. The next morning, I called Sarah and went over right away to check on her. I still wasn't over the way the creepy cabbie had been staring at her, and since he had picked me up from hers, he knew where she lived. I told her the whole story. When I was done, she just stared at me in disbelief, not sure what to say, and hugged me. At that point, the police rang and I went outside to take the call. They told me that they went to check the specific area I mentioned, finding none of the clothes or toys I said I had seen. Neither was there any sign of foul traps or a knife. They did mention finding a few pieces of cut up rope, but with nothing to go on, they just insinuated I was having a laugh at their expense. I then called the minicab company, figuring I could at least lodge a complaint against the wacko. The idea that this could have provoked him didn't enter my head at the time. They said they had no record of a car picking me up that night. One had been sent, but by the time it arrived, nobody was waiting. This creeped me out all over again. How had he found me then? Was it random? Was I chosen? Could he have been listening in to their private car radio network or something? I left Sarah's and headed back to mine, and she was going to join me after helping her mom do some chores, and I wanted to go chill for a while. I should mention at this point that Sarah and I are now happily married, going on 8 years, and that all is well. However, that day, after I got home from hers and took a shower, I wandered off to the window. What I saw sent a chill down my spine, and still does whenever I think about it. I saw it, that cream-colored Mercedes station wagon, and the crazy cabbie staring at me with such a cold, empty look on his face, until he slowly smiled and drove off. He told me I'd see him again. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to know that he could find me when he wanted. I still don't understand how he followed me or what his intentions were, and I have never told Sarah about this last incident. About a year later, I took out a loan and moved me and Sarah. We were engaged at that point, to another part of the country, and my parents followed soon after. Over the years, I've pondered what he was going to do, where he wanted to lead me, what the noises were, and how he had found me when he must have stopped to clean up the spot in the woods, but most of all, why he even picked me up that night. I suppose I should be happy it was me and not some other poor victim who might not have reacted as I did, but just in case, crazy cabbie, let's not meet. This happened some years back when I was in my last year of schooling. I was on a bus on the way to school when I happened to look up and met eyes with this guy. It happened by chance, so I quickly averted my eyes and disembarked the bus. From then on, I would have frequent chance encounters with him. My course happened to be on the same floor as another course, but on different sections of the building with the elevators in the middle. I would see him everywhere, in the corridors, at the elevator, etc. It weirded me out because he would attempt to say hi and smile at me. I didn't know him and have never seen him ever, so I would ignore him. Turns out he was studying at the course opposite mine. I chalked it up to coincidence, but still felt extremely uncomfortable. Told my friends about it, and they told me that the guy had some extremely disturbing violent tendencies, and had maybe even stalked other female students. Understandably, I freaked the heck out. The climax came one morning when I went to my classroom, which was really a project room for the final year students. I arrived late as always and went about setting up my station. The room is supposed to be locked and only accessible by a key card, but we keep the door propped open. All the desks are shielded with tall partitions and mine was shielded from the windows. Suddenly, the weird guy came into my classroom and went towards my table. He didn't even belong in this section of the building. Also, how did he know exactly where I sat if my desk was shielded from view? He saw me and I saw him, and I hurriedly attempted to feign sleep in hopes of chasing him away. He approached my table with a shoebox in his hands and asked why I was on the table and if I wasn't feeling well. My friend awkwardly told him that we were working. My friends were in a corner watching a variety show and laughing, obviously not working. He said he had something to give me. I stayed silent and continued pretending to be asleep. This lasted until he awkwardly went away. Later on, as I related this to my friends from the other course, they told me that he was extremely protective about the box and was extremely threatening to people in his class. Went something along the lines of, "If you look, I'll kill you." Problem was, nobody expressed interest in the box and the threat was unprovoked, so they got curious and peeked into the box to find that it contained dead flowers. How would he feel the need to pick dead flowers and gift them to me in a shoebox? I felt extremely unsafe and uncomfortable and insisted my friends accompany me everywhere until it felt safe enough. The strange guy also never appeared again. This happened a few months ago. The context required it. At this point in time, I had just picked my mental health back up after an extremely traumatic non-consensual episode. You can guess what, and was still struggling with chronic inability to say no to people. I'm a 21-year-old gay trans man, and while I never had trouble passing, I'm still seen as very pretty and young looking. So I was at a young people's event at my place of worship, which is completely accepting of all sorts of new people, by the way. It was a lovely evening. I met a lot of great people, got a bit tipsy and had a great time. That is, until around 12:45 to 1 a.m. when things were starting to wind up. I went upstairs and met a man, looked approximately in his late 30s, called Tobias. Tobias was quite forward, complimenting my appearance, being familiar, asking about my sexuality, so I guessed that he was interested, but I didn't feel the same way. My place of worship has always been a safe place for me, so I assumed if I didn't flirt back, he would get the message. Shortly after, I went downstairs to put something in the bin and he followed me. When we were alone, he kissed me. I pulled away and told him, "Sorry, I'm not available." He said, "Don't worry, neither am I," and gestured to his wedding ring. I laughed it off, turned, and walked back upstairs. And as we walked, Tobias told me, "I can't believe I just did that. Nothing happened. That didn't just happen." I nodded and thought that was that. The evening was getting late. I decided to get home. I offered to walk a friend of mine to the station, and when she left to go to the bathroom, he asked where I was going. I said firmly, "I'm going to walk my friend to the station, and then I'm going home." She returned, and as we left, he decided to come along with us. I asked where he was headed. He said, "Oh, I'll go to the station for you." I reiterated that I was going straight home from that point. Along the way, my friend wanted to get another drink and hang out, and I agreed. We were chatting and all seemed friendly, but I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Tobias's behavior. He was constantly complimenting me, telling me I was amazing, special, and not like anyone he'd ever met, and even kept touching me, putting his hands on my neck and down the back of my skirt, still trying to kiss me. FYI, this is a tactic called love bombing, I think, and it is a big ol' red flag. He commented on some hickeys I had. Who was that? Whoever it was. You think they're better than me? Really better than me? You let a boy do that to you? I told him that it was someone I had known for a long time and reminded him that I wasn't single. He had kissed me around 4 times up to this point, and when he did, I would pull away, try and put distance between us, move my head so he wouldn't, laugh awkwardly, and say, "We are in a shop. Please don't. I'm not what you're looking for. You don't know me," etc. This man straight up tried to make out with me 1 meter away from some poor shopkeeper serving us. Squeezed my waist and commented on how skinny and small I was. Asked me how old I was and commented, "Wow, you look so young." He asked me if I was attracted to him and I shrugged, shook my head and said, "Sorry, I'm very into the person I'm with and I can't even look at anyone else when I have someone." At this point, I should have told him to screw off. In fact, I should have said that a long time before this. But when it's actually happening, it's surprisingly difficult to get a bearing on when you can start being rude. Which is exactly what people who behave like this rely on. A vulnerable person's fear of making a scene. Or else they actually believe that this behavior means the person wants to be persuaded. We all decided to sit on a bench as all the pubs were shut. Sat on the end and my friend was next to me. Tobias whined that I wasn't sitting next to him. My friend asked why that mattered and he said, "Oh, you know, because I want him to." Never mind, I'm being too much. I'm going too far. I tried to steer the conversation away from him flirting, but he kept standing and walking to where I was sitting to kiss me, crouching by me and putting his hands on my knees. He didn't want to tell us how old he was because he was afraid I wouldn't like him, but did eventually confess he was 37. In an attempt to stop him being interested in me, I revealed that I was transgender and he put his hand up my shirt saying, "Wow, you really think I would judge you for that? You have no idea who I am. I see you." Side note, what is this, the Avatar? I would never care. I would still do everything with you. He meant sexually, by the way. I wiggled away as far as I was able and said something along the lines of, "Well, thank you, but I'm not interested." My friend had somehow misread the situation as me enjoying this behavior, probably because I'm a bloke. I texted another friend to call me so that I could get 5 minutes away from the situation, walked up the street, explained everything and made a plan, which was a really good idea, talking out loud about it. I finally registered that this wasn't right, that I was totally in the right to be uncomfortable and wanted to get the heck out. I returned and told everyone that I was going home. The second I came back, he tried to kiss me and told me he was worried and had tried to come looking for me. I moved my head so he couldn't and told him, "Please don't, I'm going home." I texted the friend I was with help, and she immediately started saying that we were going home. He should go home too, and she and I were leaving together now. He asked me, "What's changed? You've come back different. Who are you talking to? What's going on?" I told him, "I'm uncomfortable and I'm going home now." He said, "What are you talking about? Have I made you uncomfortable?" "Yes, I'm going home now." To this point, I can definitely see that my lack of rudeness and conflict avoidance tactics had actually made the situation much worse and given him the impression that I could be persuaded to do whatever he wanted, or somehow would let him on. So now that I've been absolutely crystal clear, he should back off, right? "Wrong," he said. "Wow, who are you talking to? What's happened? Whoever it is, don't throw this away. I know we had a connection. You're special." Said, "I only met you this evening. You made me feel uncomfortable and you should ask before you kiss people." Wow, I can't believe this. You're trying to turn this around on me. "I know you're drunk, it's fine. I just want to go home now." "Oh, I'm completely sober." "I'm not drunk." At this point, my friend stepped in and tried to assure him everything was fine and convince him to leave. He asked me for another kiss and I shook my head. "No, thank you." He said, "Don't throw this away," and tried to touch my face. I reiterated, "I met you this evening. I don't know you. I want to go home." He said, "Can I at least have a hug?" And immediately tried to hug me. Pushed him away and said, "I would rather not." He said, "Wow, you're making me feel uncomfortable now." I said I would rather not. Please respect my boundaries. I want to go home. My friend again tried to get him to go home. He said, "No, you're making me feel like I've done something wrong. I just want a hug." "Oh, I know what this is. You're just not used to people accepting you for who you are. You can't handle that I accept you and see you for who you are." "I mean, really?" I said, "That's not the case. I have plenty of people who accept me, but you've made me feel uncomfortable and I'm going home." At this point, I was stood up, backed against the edge of the bench with him standing barely a foot away. I had started shaking because I was feeling anxious, so I just walked away up the street. My friend stayed with him, convincing him to go home. He didn't follow us. I took her to the station and got myself into an Uber. The next day, I handed a report very similar to this to the security at my place of worship, and the dude was promptly barred from entry. I hope people can see the mechanisms of how this situation was set up and can find competence to be more outspoken than I was, because by being polite, I made the situation worse. I know it's not my fault, but I'm very grateful that I'm not timid like I used to be, and now I'm able to absolutely be firm, and if need be, rude about setting my boundary. Therapy is a hell of a drug, and it's doing me wonders. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I've lived where I lived for 3 years. It's a nice apartment in an amazing location, but they were built in the late 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom and people have been non-stop pouring in. Good weather, amazing economy, and cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I have seen the landlord staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date to attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he ended up buying a house and moved. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is, there are 2 stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct other side of the bedroom wall, is the staircase in my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout is, has my bed right up against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was one of the first ones that they did such heavy remodeling to. For weeks, I would always see the workers over there painting and redoing the floors. A few days before this happened were no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work, they were gone for the day. Nothing unusual, not a single bit. The part that is unusual is what happened one particular night. I was awake around 1 a.m. watching TV in my room when I heard somebody on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head lay on the other side of the wall. I could feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing for a few minutes, and then after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person start walking the rest of the stairs to the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that somebody was on the other side of that wall listening to me. I also knew that it was only a few days before this happened that I saw the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. I knew that there was no way somebody already moved in that fast. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anybody walked out. I sat there for about 15 minutes just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back into my room and laid down in bed again. I didn't play the TV, just sat there waiting to hear something again. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence until I heard movement of the stairs again. This time though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I was sitting there in silence, this person was just on the other side of the wall listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the police. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me somebody would be out very soon. I went back to one room and watched out the window again. Only a few moments later, a police car pulled up and a cop got out to examine the building and apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door and shortly after, could hear him talking to somebody but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I went downstairs and he informed me very nicely that somebody just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop that it was a heck of a way to meet your new neighbor. I felt embarrassed, but more importantly, felt very relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as just being late and my mind playing massive tricks on me. The next day, I went to leave my apartment when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps towards my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on and not a single piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked over to a maintenance man and said, "Didn't somebody move in here?" And he informed me no, and that the apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called my landlord. I asked her if somebody was staying there and she said absolutely not. I told her about what I experienced the night before and she was floored. She told me that they would change that apartment's locks immediately. She also suggested that I call the non-emergency line to the police department and inform them that nobody lives there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all the information in detail of what happened. They were able to quickly figure out what officer came out to check out the situation, so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed that I have never seen him around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks, until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out, and I stopped hearing about it and started seeing fewer and fewer patrol cars randomly in the parking lot. After that night, I never heard anything in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in and they were very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went to introduce myself to them, but to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping the following weeks after that happened to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I have zero idea what the intentions of this person were or what he was doing on that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that's ever happened to me. So, random man that's listening to me sleep, let's not meet again. I'll start out by saying that I'm not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a pretty smart girl at this age and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, it put you in the living room and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on the PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to get a drink and told him to stay in the room and I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back doors because it was behind the living room. Kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Ma. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyways, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on, because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother. Started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. Can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I of course freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as heck. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I heard my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motioned to him with my hands to go back in the room and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man probably around 6'6" and 300 pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already, of course, horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch, and he needed to be very quiet, and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Man, my stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck rose and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was happening, hysterical at this point but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened and I could no longer remain calm. I lost it. I started screaming. I mean like a blood-curdling scream. The kind that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started laughing. You know I could just bust down this door in about 2 seconds, right, little girl? Tap, tap, tap. Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. What I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was he was scraping the door with his really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. Then I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up, etc. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there, so being in my hysterical state, I started screaming, "No, no, no, please," over and over again. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced that we were going to die. Eventually I calmed myself a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed. We had been so scared. It turns out this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew this man. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now. She doesn't drink and is now married to a cop. She has completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust down the door to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick down the door. It was super thin. It creeps me out still, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work 3rd shift, so I'll come home and the door will be unlocked. It's infuriating because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide. I have 2 kids and they will never ever go through what I did. Sorry for my shitty writing style, but I wanted to tell my story after lurking here for so long. Back in my younger days, when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be the most obvious of dangerous encounters. I was looking to move and I was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location with a good price, and two seemingly professional male roomies. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested that he goes along because the place is nearby and they'll have to meet him at some point anyways. We get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate seems a little taken aback at the fact that I had somebody with me. I suppose it could be seen as unusual to bring your boyfriend, but I figured, oh well, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me to be their roommate simply because he's with me, I can't do anything about it now. Let's just see the place. The apartment is huge. We're both suitably impressed until we turn the corner of the living room and we see it. The two cameras set up with a light pointed at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch who is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off of the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realize the look they were giving was disappointment. I shoot my boyfriend a very quick look of understanding, but we silently decide to continue with the tour so as to not escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice to have a camera so I can videotape myself for my auditions. They both laugh much too hard and say, yeah, that's what we were doing. He brings us over to my room and it's literally a broom closet. You wouldn't even be able to fit a single-sized bed in there. It's now patently obvious that there was never a room for rent in the first place. I take this opportunity to get out there by saying, oh, that's too bad. I have a queen bed and I won't be able to fit. Okay, well, thanks for your time. We get out to the street and walk around the corner without saying a word. When we finally look at each other, it's in this stunned silence. He just hugged me really tight and we went for a walk in the park. So my let's not meet encounter happened 7 years ago. I haven't really spoken about it since it happened, as I kind of just wanted to move on and I was really unnerved by the whole experience. I was 25. I am female and I was working a job as an admin assistant, office worker to tide me over and pay my bills until I eventually figured out what the career of my dream was. I was tired of the job. I'd been there about a year when this happened, and believe me, when the creepy shit went down, I was certainly incensed to get myself on a decent career path and the heck out of that place. So you understand my old workplace building, which will give you a clear picture of how this began. I worked in a somewhat old building with a few floors, and on each floor were numerous office spaces that were rented out by different companies. It was a pretty open plan building, some parts more dilapidated than others, and it was in serious need of refurbishment to bring it A, up to health and safety standards, and B, cosmetic standards for the general public. How the offices on my floor were set out meant that our small office, which only consisted of 4 to 5 workers on different days, was situated at the front of the building with access through the front and back of the building, but nobody really used the back. Our staff quarters, as we called them, the lunchroom, were situated at the back of the building, and being an older style building meant there was a long hall and lots of space between the office and the staff quarters. Staff quarters were used only for lunch breaks, and as we were such a small office, we all rotated our lunch breaks so that only one person was off for lunch in the lunchroom at a time. Nobody else really used the lunchroom, as they preferred to go out and get lunch from the nearby shops, but as I had a shorter lunch break, it was always me, alone in the lunchroom at the back of this old creepy-ass building by the rear entry point. Other parts of the building were now under refurbishment, so there was a lot of upheaval in certain spaces and areas, but we managed to retain ours as normal for a while, before building work was scheduled to begin on our floor. Bear in mind that the lunchroom was so far back from the main offices that nothing could be heard or seen that way. There were only 2 companies on the ground floor where I was situated. The other one was on the other side of the building and used the front entrance, but we rarely saw them and certainly didn't keep track of their staff members or clients, and there was no need for us to see who was going in and out. Anyways, I digress. I was sitting in the lunchroom one day eating, heater going as it was freezing, minding my own business, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow quickly sweep past the door from the light underneath it. It wasn't unusual for new clients to be wandering around looking for a specific office they required. As we were on the ground floor, there was often a slew of stupid people wandering the corridors aimlessly looking for the office they required. We did have a code entry system on the front door and a telephone system, so you could press the office you needed to get into and it would call through, and they would let you in so people couldn't just walk in without being let in, if you get me. We also had a code for workers to use to get through the front door. As I said, the back door wasn't much used apart from the odd worker who had a set of keys for it, and it was completely unmonitored. I wasn't too startled even when the lunchroom door opened this particular day and a smart-looking man put his head round, suited and booted and smelling like expensive cologne. I honestly was more embarrassed to see somebody as attractive peering in, as I was sat there with mayo splatter on my shirt and a mouthful of bread, looking in absolute state. But hey, I didn't usually see anyone back there, and I am a messy eater, I admit. "Can I help you?" I asked him, trying to clean myself up. He laughed and said I looked like the one who needed help, and I immediately laughed back, aware that he was still at the door and not imposing on me in any way. Yet, when I laughed along with him, he seemed to take that as an invitation to come right in and sit opposite me at the table. And to my surprise, he took some food out of his expensive-looking leather bag and started brazenly eating a sandwich. "Hey, I'm the HR manager for such and such company upstairs, and every time I go out to get my lunch, I always wonder who is sitting in here alone, so I thought I'd just have a look," he said, still eating and seemingly very calm and chilled. The weird thing about him was that he seemed so normal. Nothing about this guy made me worried. In fact, it was nice to have some company on my lunch break, as most of the time I just sat scrolling through creepy news articles on my phone. We carried on chatting, mostly about mundane stuff. I asked him about his job in the company upstairs, and he asked me about mine. I asked him about where he usually took his lunch breaks. You know, just normal small talk, but it felt more comfortable than that. This guy was super charming. He made me feel at ease. That part is the most chilling to me. I was totally at ease and unguarded. It became a pretty regular thing for him to join me in the lunchroom, and honestly, I was beginning to get a bit of a crush on this guy. He had a good job, was attractive, and was very charming and normal. I began looking forward to seeing him. Stupid, I know. A little attention from an attractive guy, but hey, I was single and not bad looking. So I figured, why couldn't I have a harmless little crush? He had told me his name was Alan, and honestly, I didn't intend to take it anywhere with him. I was totally happy single at the time, and I was getting some minor flirtations from him, but nothing that confirmed he had a crush on me too, or wanted to take it any further. He moaned about the building work taking place and how the whole upstairs offices were a mess. Their break rooms, etc., had all been gutted, and he was glad to have somewhere to eat his lunch that nobody else knew about from his office. Again, not your average creeper, I know. At this point, I didn't even think the guy was a creeper. Until one day, things took a turn. Alan stormed into the lunchroom one Thursday, and I swear, in his eyes, I saw the look of a caged animal. You know that crazy look. You know that restless and jittery and hyper look. It kind of says somebody isn't thinking straight at all. I immediately had my guard up a bit because I had never seen him like this before. It freaked me out the way he stormed into the room, slammed his bag down on the table, and started ranting about how his boss was a jerk and that he wished he could gut him like a fish. All while pacing around, running his hand through his hair, beads of sweat forming on his brow, and pure rage in his eyes. I'd always thought his eyes were so pretty before. They were a steely blue, but right now they looked darker and more imposing than ever. I tried really hard to pacify him and calm him down. I was repeatedly saying it would be alright and to calm down and let's just eat. And whatever had happened, I'm sure could be sorted out. He slumped down in a chair and I went over to him, kind of standing beside him but obviously over him, and I put my hand on his shoulder to console him. With that, he flew up and pushed me back against the wall. I was stunned and I couldn't speak. His body was pressed against me, and almost through his rage, he was in a trance-like state. After he pushed me back against the wall, he just stood there, his hands holding my wrist down by my side, almost like he was taking some weird comfort from the fact that he had me up against the wall. He buried his face into my neck and I was frozen to the spot, like, what the heck is going on here? I always said I would never be one of those girls in an emergency or dangerous situations to freeze. But honestly, I had never been in this type of situation, and I could tell he was really volatile in this precise moment. I really didn't know what he was going to do, so I didn't want to risk pissing him off more and then have him attack me or something. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, his face buried in my neck, still holding my wrist quite forcefully when all of a sudden, he licked my neck and said, "You smell nice." Yes, he actually licked my neck. Seemingly calmer, that's when I decided. Nope, I am not standing here with this person who was clearly unstable, holding me up against a wall in anger, and then suddenly being all soft-spoken again and licking my neck in this weird predatory way. That's what it felt like to me right in that second. I felt so stupid for starting to eat with this guy and not even question why he was coming to our lunchroom. I told him to get off me. I was leaving. At that point, I was prepared to take a beating. It shouldn't have been like that, but I honestly didn't know what his deal was. Was he crazy? Was he just emotional or upset? Was he trying to seduce me? Was he going to hurt me? I don't know. I realized I didn't even know this guy. We spent half an hour to an hour in each other's company, passing the lunch hour, but I didn't really know anything about him as a person. It had been a couple of weeks of lunches together, and I realized how short an amount of time that was to really have any idea about this person. He let go of my wrist, and then in the most sinister tone I'd ever heard, he said, "You always seem like you wanted it from me, you damn whore." Before I could respond, he grabbed his bag and stormed out of the lunchroom, and tears just sprung to my eyes. I cracked the door open to make sure he'd left, and I just sprinted back to the front of the building where my office was and told the guys in there everything that had just happened. They were absolutely fuming. They knew this guy had been hanging around me in the lunchroom, but as I'd always been comfortable with it and thought Alan was okay, nobody ever thought anything of it. They actually thought it was hilarious every day when I came back from lunch all tongue-tied after my encounter with attractive Alan, as they now referred to him. They insisted we march upstairs and put in a complaint as a company, and I knew that even if I didn't agree, they would march up themselves to do it. Eventually, I agreed, after feeling shaky and vulnerable, but I knew I didn't want to have to face Alan after the incident in the lunchroom. I went up regardless, flanked by two guys I worked with, one of whom was my immediate boss. As we began explaining the situation, it was evident that something was wrong. The woman and the man from the upstairs company looked really confused when I explained about their HR manager, Alan, and what he had done. They explained that their HR manager was a female called Jules, and that I must have been mistaken because there was no Alan that worked at the company. We asked every single company in the building, and not one company had an Alan working for them and never had. We eventually came to the conclusion that Alan had been coming in every day for lunch, but with absolutely no idea why or what for. We also didn't know if he had the building code or a set of keys for the back, and we didn't know where he had initially come from. Unnoticed, wandering freely around the building. The locks were changed, the code was changed, and CCTV was installed, as it never had been before. Plus, security checks were put in place at the building after this incident, with everybody entering the building being monitored. I never ever saw Alan again, and I still to this day don't know why he was coming in the building every day, having lunch with me, pretending to be an office worker, and I don't know what happened that day when he flipped. So yeah, this isn't the usual creeper on Let's Not Meet, but Alan, let's never meet again. I'm back with another story from my childhood. I tried to add more details that I can remember, since the last one got requests to be more specific. I was about 14 or 15 years old, walking back from one of my friend's house at around 10 p.m. on a school night. Trisha's father was a police dispatcher, and the small, medium town I grew up in didn't have much of a force to speak of. I could run to the station in 2 minutes flat, and the park I frequented was next to it. It was also the same building as the Justice Department. Between Trisha's house and my own was less than a mile. I was halfway there when I could see a car, a Ford of a dark color, slowly roll through an intersection in front of me. I knew it was a Ford because it looked like a normal unmarked police car. It stopped for a good 30 seconds in the middle of said intersection as I walked towards it. When I got to it, I sort of stopped. Not as much scared as I was plain confused. I walked around the back of it. The lights inside were turned off as well, and the dark shape in front of the seat sat very still. I kept my ears perked, listening to the sound of the car's tires inching across the gravel. I didn't want to turn, but I could hear the low purr of the engine behind me, following me ever so slowly. Now I was worried. But Dad didn't teach me to panic, especially for how close I was to the police station. I took a deep breath and broke into a full-on sprint across the road, passing through people's lawns and yards, and through an open lot until I could see the 2-lane road that cut our town in half. Across that road was the station. I didn't even want to look behind me again and see if the man was there, because I heard his car. No lights flooded the ground or the space around me. He still had them turned off. I kept running into the street. It was so late and there were no cars on the road. I pushed open the gate separating the park and the outside, flying through it. Breathing hurt. It was winter in the northeast and the cold was biting. When I reached the glass door of the city hall/police station, my heart fluttered. I was safe. It would be okay. I had to ring the bell to get the police to open the double-locked doors. As I did that, I heard a car pull in behind me into the parking lot. It was that same car, and who should step out of it but Trisha's dad, in his police dispatcher's uniform. "Honey, why'd you run away from me? I was trying to get your attention. You left your cell phone out." He held it out, walking towards me, proving his good intentions. His smile was wide and it was supposed to be reassuring, but it chilled me. Nobody came to the door. I was alone with him still. When he got to me, I grabbed the cell phone and stuffed it into my back pocket. I remember the next thing that happened like it was yesterday. He had coffee on his breath and he smelled like cigarettes. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm and pinned me to the door behind him. "Didn't your," insert racial slur here, "daddy tell you to say thank you, pretty girl?" I was shocked. Not once have he ever spoken to me like that. They were from Kansas, but he'd never given any indication that he thought like this. "Didn't you hear me, girl?" He was inches from my face. His grin now a creepy, sadistic sneer. He used his thumb that pinned my arm to touch the side of my breast. The way he said "girl" still sends a cold shiver down my spine. I've been assaulted before, but Trisha's dad's way of saying "girl" still haunts me today. I'll hear it in my mind and want to shrink into nothingness, scream at it until it goes away and cry. And just as suddenly, he let go and left. I didn't know until a police officer knocked on the glass door behind me. He was staring at Trisha's dad. "Problem, miss?" "No problem, officer. She just forgot her cell phone." Trisha's dad answered for me, his normal smile back on his face. He stepped away from me and let go, but I could still feel his hands on my arm. I don't remember what I did. Nod? Whimper? But I blinked on whatever happened until I got home and cried. Never even told my twin sister, Lexi, what went down. Ever since then, he looked at me in the creepiest way. He would do that sneer at me as soon as I walked into the door to their house. I'll never forget how awful that night made me feel. I didn't walk home alone again. Without a knife. I took from my dad's possessions at least. He's always been a creep and has caused a lot of issues with Trisha's mom and him. They're divorced now since this happened almost 10 years ago. Not only was this the beginning of my problems with him, but it was for Trisha too. She and I still keep in very close contact and she updates me on her situations with them. Apparently he attempted to molest her several times with physical repercussions. She's a strong-willed, physically capable woman and handled herself well. She got the heck out of Dodge as soon as she turned 18. Thankfully, she's an adult now, far away from him, and hasn't seen him in several years. I hope she never does. Hello. First off, I'm very new to posting here, so please let me know if I need to correct anything. This just happened yesterday evening in a small mountain town about 40 minutes outside of the major city that my boyfriend and I live in. We had decided to reserve a jacuzzi at a hot springs resort, just to take some time to relax and enjoy getting out of the city for a few hours. We left the apartment around 6:30, to allow for traffic and make sure we made it to the resort by 8. We had a nice drive up, making conversation and flicking through songs. We arrived about half an hour ahead of schedule, so we decided to sit in the car and wait to check in. When we arrived, I was immediately met with a sense of unease. I didn't tell my boyfriend, but made a mental note of the feeling. I've learned not to brush those feelings off, so I made sure I was a bit more alert during our little trip. We checked in and got all set up in our jacuzzi. The way it was set up was very private, so there was fencing all around us and a door with a lock on it to get into the area. When I first walked in, I was overcome with the feeling that I had to get that door locked as soon as I could. I'm usually a safe person and would have done this anyway, but the feeling of the locked door being a necessity at that moment was rather uncanny. As the night progresses, the sky begins to darken and my boyfriend and I are remarking on how beautiful the mountains and sky are at this time of the evening. We are making jokes about some crazy mountain man running out of the hills towards us, and I start cracking up. I'm mid-laugh when we hear someone jiggle the door to our jacuzzi area. I stop laughing and I am immediately struck with a fight-or-flight sense of fear. Now, I've been startled before, but this was just different. I felt legitimately threatened by the energy that whoever was outside of that door was giving off. As the jiggling continued, my boyfriend called out, "Yo, you need something?" The person on the other side began to yank forcefully on the door now, and my boyfriend yelled out, "Hey." I've heard my boyfriend's voice when he gets upset or angry at someone, but this was different. This was the "you really don't want to mess with me" protective type of voice. The jiggling continued for a moment longer and then ceased completely. During this time, I had been about 15 feet away from my clothes, which contained my knife, and was 100% ready to dive for them if the person had broken through the locked door. Since we were only a few minutes away from our time being up anyway, we decided to get dressed as quickly as possible and just book it back to the car. The whole time we were getting ready, up until we drove out of the lot, I could feel somebody watching us. About 100 yards or so away from the resort, there was a park of mobile homes. From our tub, you could easily see these mobile homes if you stood up on the edge of the jacuzzi. That means that whoever was home and looking out their window could see you too. During the whole time we were there, I was the only one who stood up completely, so I'm the only one that anyone in the mobile homes would have seen, making it seem like I was all alone there potentially. Later in the evening, my boyfriend and I were rehashing exactly what had happened and trying to figure out who the heck had tried to get into our jacuzzi. We figured if it had been resort staff, they would have made their presence known and asked to come inside. If it had been another customer and they tried the wrong door, we assumed they would have said something like, "Oh, sorry, wrong door." My boyfriend looked at me and said, "You know, you were the only one who stood up in the hot tub. And with the way it's positioned, somebody in that trailer could have easily been staring right at you." This honestly made my blood run cold for a moment because I knew he was right and I knew in my gut that's probably what happened. I'm a pretty small girl, about 5'5", and I look barely 18, even though I'm actually almost 23 and I weigh about 100 pounds. Overpowering me would be like taking candy from a baby. This realization, coupled with the fact that we both felt so disturbed and uneasy about the whole thing, made me realize whoever was trying to get in there did not have any good intentions. I've thought about sharing this story on Reddit before. The time and place never seemed right until I found this subreddit. I rarely ever think of this. I think I mostly blocked it out. I am female, and when I was 25, I was in a transition period of my life. I was divorcing my husband and moving back to my home state to figure stuff out. My aunt had a small 1,500 square foot, 1950s house in a quiet neighborhood. A doors that stick, squeaky wood floors type of place. She had moved out but couldn't commit to the sale. She was happy to let me live there for a bit. I lived in the house for about 5 months. This house was a single-story home, but it was on a hill, so if you went around the back of the house outside, you could walk through a door in a small basement of sorts that you could stand in. If you were in this small basement and continued to walk toward the front of the house, you would quickly be crouching and then crawling. It was a small concrete storage area, and it was under what was my bedroom. One thing I remember about this place was that it was creaky and not well insulated. The floors were creaky, and when you were down in the basement area, you could sort of see light coming through the cracks in the bedroom floorboards. I maybe went down there once, got creeped out, and left. It was around the back of the house, like I said, and I had no reason to even be back there. Being 25 and recently leaving my jerk husband, I will admit I had a few male suitors visit me in that house, in that creaky, uninsulated bedroom. So I get my dream job and I am moving out of the house. I'm also moving out of the state. My aunt has one request of me, to turn the water off at the street before I leave. So right before I leave the house, I turn the water off at the street. I come back inside and turn on the tub faucet. No water. I have done my job. However, this is where fate steps in. I left the faucet turned on. Didn't think to turn it back off. I drive away to my new life. A few days later, my aunt calls. She's upset because the water company has called her to say there is an unusually high amount of water running at her home. I promised her that I turned the water off and told her about checking the tub, so I'm out of state. She's out of state. My mom gets recruited to go over and figure out what's going on. Well, come to find out, the neighbor's husband from next door had been kicked out. He was living in the little room under my bedroom. He had strung an electric cord over the fence from his house. He had clothes and a toothbrush. Guess he was bathing in our yard. And when I turned off the water, he went right back out to the street and turned it back on. He had been living right under my bedroom floorboards. I am tense just writing and remembering this. I never ever want to meet this guy. The thought of him right under my feet, listening to me in my bedroom, still gives me chills. March 14th, 2008. I was 7 years old, a junior in high school. I lived in a square-mile suburban town in Nassau County, which is one of the richest counties in America. Life there was very quiet. Not much goes on. I had been struggling with depression and couldn't focus on my schoolwork. I had a paper and a whole bunch of homework I hadn't done the night before, so I woke up at 7 a.m. and made my way downstairs to my mom's room to ask if I could sleep in, catch up on some schoolwork, and go to school late, and she said okay. I woke up around 10 a.m., later than I had anticipated. I walked downstairs, poured myself a bowl of cereal, and said good morning to my poodle. That's when I heard knocking on the door. At first it was regular, calm knocking. I didn't think much of it, but didn't want to answer the door in my pajamas. I picked up the house phone and dialed my mom's phone number. She was at work, as a church secretary. Hey, Mom, are you expecting anybody at the house? Because somebody is knocking on the door. No. Could it be the cable guy? No? Okay, I won't answer it. After I hung up the phone, the knocking continued. It increased and started becoming more rapid and frantic. I peeked through the curtain and saw a bluish pickup truck outside my property, and a man standing at the door. He had a red hat on, a denim jacket, jeans, and sneakers. No logos or uniform. I didn't get a good read on his face either. He kept knocking. At this point, it was riling up my dog, and he was barking on the top of the knocking. I swear, the knocking seemed to go on forever. I checked the locks on the doors to make sure they were secure. Then suddenly it stopped. Quiet. And I hear a creak, the sound of the side gate to my house. My pulse raced. Maybe it's the meter reader. I stood in a panic in the living room. The next thing I heard was shuffling coming from the bathroom. Could it be my cat playing with the shower curtain? I had to check. I walked down the hall and peered around the corner to see inside my bathroom. I'll never forget what I saw. The window in the shower was wide open. In the middle of my bright and sterile bathroom was a dark mess pouring in through the window, one leg at a time. Ah, shit. Do I run outside the front door? What if there are more men outside that chase me down? Side door? Too close to the bathroom. So I bolted up the stairs as carefully and silently as I could. I heard my dog barking incessantly, not in a panic, but excitement. Happiness. I closed my bedroom door behind me as quietly as possible. I didn't shut it all the way, so as to not make any noise. Cell phone. I picked it up and wondered who would come quicker, 911 or my mom, who was at work less than a mile away. I dialed her number. In a whisper. Mom, there's somebody in the house. The creak of his footsteps on the stairs. Shit, I had to think fast. I ducked underneath my desk. I could hear one step at a time as he slowly ascended the stairs. It was kind of like a movie. I quickly dialed 911. That's when my bedroom door slowly opened. His head peered around it to scan the room. That was it. He saw me. I dropped the phone before I could hit call and instinctively put my hands over my head as he rushed at me with a crowbar flying through the morning air. "Please don't hurt me," I said. "Don't scream, don't say anything." With a gloved hand, he struck me in the face, sending my glasses flying. Now I'm blind. Fell to the ground and squatted with my hands over my head. He took my cell phone. I was shaking and my mind was racing. I'm going to die, I thought. He dangled the crowbar over my neck. I could feel the iron tip graze the skin. He was standing over me. How much will this hurt? How long will it take? What will it feel like having a crowbar in my skull? My mom is on the way home. Not her too. This is it. I'm screwed. He rummaged through my things on my desk. Then there was silence. Is he still in the room? How many people are inside my house? I don't want to know. I heard the house getting trashed downstairs, and I could hear my dog jumping and barking at the invader or invaders, and I could hear them hushing him in a baby voice. Quiet again, for what felt like hours. I heard my name, and I was stunned and confused. Heard it again. My mom. I ran down the stairs. The front door was wide open. There she was in my living room. Bursted into tears and told her everything. I was still in a panic. Was he still in the house? Was he hiding? Called 911. They came and investigated. A pillowcase to stuff the items in. My iPod, speakers, a brand new camcorder, laptop, and leather jacket for disguise. Were the items missing? I spoke with a forensic artist. The cops drove me around the neighborhood to take a look at suspects they stopped on the street, but he was never caught. After everything was settled, I needed a shower. I cried when I had to scrub the tub of muddy footprints. My post-traumatic stress terrorized my life. I had to sleep in my mom's room. I kept a knife under my pillow. Everywhere I went, I thought I saw the man who robbed me, not only of my personal belongings, but also of my overall sense of safety. It didn't help when at school the principal made an announcement about the break-in on the loudspeaker. He told the entire building that I let my attacker in and referred to him as a gentleman. This twisted the story completely. So much so that a rumor went around school that my attacker assaulted me and that I liked it. A whole lot has happened since then, and now I'm much happier, but I still feel the effects of PTSD today. The scary thing here is that he was a landscaper. My family never had enough money for landscaping, but both of our neighbors did. Landscapers are given access to people's yards, sometimes when they're not home, and have plenty of time to scope out unlocked windows, access points, etc. You probably didn't expect anyone to be home because I didn't answer the door. The moral of the story is to always answer the door. Or if you don't feel safe answering the door, make a noise to signify that you're home. And of course, call the police first. I was looking for a story that I posted a while back, but I think I deleted it on accident. By far, this has one of the craziest and scariest moments of my life, and in light of recent events going on in my life, has resurfaced in my mind. I lived a pretty sheltered life as a child. I'm an only child, and as is sometimes the case with only children, I lived an extremely overprotected life. My mom drilled the stranger danger in my head since preschool and would always stress the importance of being safe. Never go into a bathroom by yourself. Never get into a stranger's car. Never drink from an open bottle. Always ask for permission. Always stay within adults' eyesight. I have to admit that half of the time it went in one ear and out the other. As a preteen, I thought I knew it all and hated the constant nagging. However, I get where she was coming from now. My mom was a recent widow and was adjusting to the role of mom and dad, trying to shield me from the horrors that I am only now beginning to see. We lived in an area that used to be a quaint little dairy town, but over the years had gone downhill and became crime-ridden. The dairy farm fell out of business, and in its place, they constructed homes. It wasn't a bad place to live, but it wasn't the best either. I grew up thinking it was a common occurrence to hear helicopters fly by, announcing that they were looking for somebody. The cross street from my house led to a park that was known for gang activity, where almost every weekend somebody would either be found dead or beaten up. But it was okay because we didn't live on that end of the street, I thought. We knew most of the neighbors, and if we didn't know them by name, we at least knew what they looked like. Despite it not being the best neighborhood, it was pretty quiet overall, and we felt safe enough. By the time I was in 7th grade, I finally had gotten some freedoms. My best friend Tiffany and I would take turns spending the night at each other's houses, but most of the time she would come to mine. Tiffany had a little brother that would always pester us, and she liked coming over to my house because we could talk about boys without her little brother trying to eavesdrop. I think my mom preferred it that way too because she was much more lenient with us, knowing that we are safe at our house. She would even sometimes go on her daily walks and leave us home by ourselves for about an hour or so, and we loved this. I'm not sure what happened or what we did this particular day. Probably ate pizza, sat on my front porch, outside as the sun set, and listened to the radio at way too high of a volume. Perhaps this was even one of those nights my mom left us home alone for a while. I wish I could say I saw something out of the ordinary or felt uneasy, but I didn't. After it got dark, we retreated to my room. My room has 2 windows. One faces the backyard and the other faces the street. I like natural light as much as possible, so as usual, the blinds were open. Even though it was now dark outside, which meant people could see in but we couldn't see out, I still left them open. I was too lazy to climb onto my bed to close them and had a false sense of security, knowing there was a tall pine tree directly in front of my window. With the tree in front of the window, I felt protected, almost as if my mom were invisible to the outside world. As the night grew quieter, we decided to build a fort out of sheets and tell scary stories. By this time, it was really late at night, and my mom was fast asleep in her room. After the first story or two, I started to grow uneasy and got up to close the blinds. I was creeped out, thinking somebody could be lurking outside, peeking in, but figured it was all in my head because of the stories we were telling. We got through a couple more classic stories, like the hook killer and stuff. Started talking about true ghost stories, things that relatives claimed they saw or heard. Our eyes were watery, hearts pounding, and muscles clenched when suddenly there was loud, furious banging on my bedroom window. It wasn't a knock that grew into a series of louder knocks. It was like an angry one that you felt throughout your body. My heart was pounding in sync with each subsequent knock. I sat there frozen, not knowing what to do. My mind was frantically trying to make sense of the situation. It just didn't make sense that somebody would be knocking on my bedroom window so late at night. We have an iron gate that surrounds our house, and it's pretty loud. I was surprised that we didn't hear the gate open. Even then, the front door is 5 feet from the gate. Why didn't they knock at the door first? My room is all the way in the back and wasn't even the first window with the light on. You pass by 2 other windows before you get to mine. A million questions are running through my head, and my brain comes to the only possible conclusion. It's Tiffany's little brother trying to scare us. Yeah, because it makes sense that a 10-year-old boy walked over to my house in the middle of the night to scare us. In what felt like ages, but was probably only a matter of seconds, I finally came to the realization that it wasn't her little brother. The knocks continued. They were loud and angry, yet nobody was saying anything. We were both frozen in fear. I just wanted to stay hidden in the fort where I couldn't be seen. What if whoever was knocking was peeking in through the cracks in the blinds and watched me as I crawled out from under the sheets? The thought of that made my every muscle weak. Then silence. The knocking had stopped. I felt my body ease up a little bit. Maybe who was ever there had left, and cue teenage brain, we decided to go investigate. My mom was blissfully unaware of what was going on, still fast asleep. We slid out of the fort and tiptoed down the hallway towards the front door. Adrenaline pumped through our bodies as we decided one of us would sneak to the front door and look out the peephole or window and see if we could see something. Neither one of us wanted to be the one to do it, but it was my house, so I volunteered. All the doors were locked and the windows had bars on them. I just had to be as quiet as possible. Beneath every step, I took the wood creaked and groaned. After a few minutes, I finally found myself standing at the front door. My whole torso felt numb as I inched my face closer to the peephole. Holding my breath, I look out and I suddenly feel hot and cold at the same time. I didn't know whether to keep looking out or slink back down. I think a little part of me had convinced myself that the porch would be empty that night, but instead, standing on my porch was an unfamiliar man. I had no idea who this man is, but he is standing awkwardly close to the door. Something about it just didn't seem right. What threw me off the most was that he was just pounding on my bedroom window, 15 or so minutes ago, and now he was standing at the front door so calmly and quiet. It was as if the roaring avalanche had turned into a falling feather. With my stomach in my throat, I snuck back to the hallway where Tiffany was waiting for me. All I could say is, "There's a man out there." "Immediately," she says. "Go tell your mom." It wasn't a question, but a demand. We ran into her room and urgently told her, "Mom, someone's knocking." She must have sensed the urgency in my voice because she sprung up and told us to stay in her room with the door closed, and instructed us not to open the door no matter what happened. We stood behind that door for what seemed like ages, trying to listen. The front door was too far away, so all we heard was silence. Finally, we hear footsteps coming toward us. It was so quiet around us that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I about had a heart attack when my mom's bedroom door started swinging open. It was my mom. She told us not to worry about it and that the man was gone. This left me with a million questions, but she was very vague. What did he want? Nothing. Who was he? I don't know. She shooed us back to bed and we complied. The adrenaline had started to wear off and I was now exhausted. We didn't stay up and speculate or talk. That was it, and it was the end of the story. For now, at least. The next day, I was sitting in my room and heard my mom talking to someone. I have always been a very quiet kid. Even as a baby, people would often forget I was around. I'm quiet, but I hear everything. I stopped what I was doing, probably downloading music on Napster or something, and listened. My mom was telling her friend about the man. Apparently, she opened the door and through the screen asked the man if he needed any help. The man stammered as if trying to think up a story and introduced himself as the neighbor. He said that his mom was sick and he was going around asking for money to help buy her medicine. Concerned but also trying to poke holes at his story, my mom asked him what her name was in case my mom knew her. The guy didn't give her an answer, or gave a vague one, and then pointed in a general direction, saying they lived at that house over there. My mom didn't buy it. She knew everybody that lived near us, and she had never seen this man before. She probably should have just closed the door at this point, and told him she didn't have any money on her, but she didn't want to make him mad. She didn't know if he was armed or dangerous and thought, maybe he's just a junkie and will run off if I give him some cash. Luckily, she had fallen asleep in her clothes, so as she reached in her back pocket, she found $5. Change from the pizza we had ordered earlier. She unlocked the screen door and handed him the cash. The man started getting more aggressive and growls. "That's all you got?" Now, my mom is starting to sense something more sinister in the man. He's not just a junkie, or if he is, he's a very aggressive one. My mom then lies to him and quickly tells the man, "Yes, this is all I have. We live day to day here, and $5 is actually even more than I should spare, but your mom is sick and I feel bad. She definitely needs this money more than we do right now." Not satisfied by her answer, he continues to demand more cash. My mom realizes that this man is not taking no for an answer and begins to bluff. She tells him that she'll go get her husband. Maybe he has some cash on him. We really don't have any more cash, but maybe my husband has some on him. I would hate to leave a neighbor in need. Your mom must really need that medicine, Tim. At once, the man's demeanor changes as he mutters, "No, that's okay," and treks out of there. I don't know what would have happened if the man had called her on her bluff, but thinking a man was present scared the heck out of the guy enough to drive him away fast. I grew cold, thinking that he probably thought Tiffany and I were home alone. He must have been watching us and was planning on breaking in. Cue teenage brain. Oh, well, he's gone. Gotta go download that Usher album. Disclaimer. I'm not sure if the following event was related, but due to its close proximity to the previous one, I think it's definitely worth mentioning. The following week, I was waiting for Tiffany's mom to pick me up to go to school. We lived 2 houses away, so they would always swing by for me in the morning. I usually would be done getting ready before they arrived, so I would head outside to the front yard and wait for them out there. Sometimes I would go climb a tree in the front and look for the bird eggs. Other times, I'd just search for 4-leaf clovers. I was walking around not paying attention to my surroundings, when I heard what I can only describe as what I would imagine a gun with a silencer sounds like. A quiet little pew, followed by a loud noise, which I later realized was glass breaking. Stunned, I looked around. What the heck was that? All I saw was a white van drive by. I looked over at my neighbor's house and noticed that the window to their car was completely shattered, shards of glass everywhere. I still didn't quite put two and two together until I saw the same white van drive by, the driver staring me down. I felt a sense of unease and wanted to run back inside. For some reason, though, I didn't. I had too much pride and didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they scared me. Also, I thought if I ran inside, they would maybe think I was a snitch and would retaliate more. I played dumb as if I didn't notice anything, and they drove by again, and once more after that. I tried to not look at the van as it drove by, but each time it drove by, I could feel the driver's gaze on me. Soon after, Tiffany's mom came by and took me to school. I don't know if the man drove by a fourth time. Never told anyone about the van. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that. This happened to a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as me when we were about 8 or 9 years old. My friend E and her family lived just a few houses down the street from mine. We lived in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other. The biggest worry we ever had was that some outsider would come into the neighborhood and cause trouble. Some people left their homes unlocked because we felt that safe. There was an incredibly nice family that lived directly across the street from E's house. A mom, a dad, a 16-year-old son, and their other mentally challenged son who was 22 years old. I'll call him Tim. Tim was always home because he wasn't employed due to his disability, but his parents were working full-time, and his brother had school. All day, every day, he would be outside waving and smiling at anyone who drove or walked by. Big smiles, showing all of his teeth and sometimes giggling, just out of the pure excitement and happiness of interacting with other people since he spent most of his time alone. He was not creepy per se. One day, E was sick and didn't go to school. Even though she was only about 8 or 9 years old, E was allowed to stay home sick by herself. Plus, her mom was going to be home around 2 o'clock anyways, since she only worked part-time, and the neighborhood was safe enough. E locked all of the doors except the one that led into the garage. They used this as their front door because it was easier in those cookie-cutter homes to just open the garage, pull in, get out of the car, close the garage, and walk into their house through the unlocked door that led from the inside of the garage to the inside of their home. This is obviously not the safest way to protect your home from intruders, but we literally all did it, as if a flimsy garage door could keep anyone from getting into it if they wanted. The worst part is that they had an outside cat and kept the garage door cracked just enough for him to get inside for his food or shelter if he needed be. So E's asleep, feeling sick and with a fever. All the doors and windows are locked, except the door leading to the cracked garage door. Tim was bound to know she was home alone since he was outside the front of his house all the time. E wakes up to pounding on the front door. Startled, she walks downstairs and looks through the peephole. It's Tim. She cracks the door and he says something along the lines of how he notices everything and would guard her home since she's home alone. She said thanks, but there was no need to and to have a good day. It was beautiful weather. He looked pissed. He got angry and said, "You think I can't do it because I'm dumb, but you watch and see because I'm not dumb." She said, "Sorry, and I didn't mean it like this, but I have to rest now." She dozed off and woke up to a noise downstairs in the kitchen, the room the door from the garage led into. She hadn't heard the garage door open, but she was sick, so she figured she was deep in sleep and just hadn't noticed. Completely disoriented from time, she looked over at the alarm clock. It was 10:20, way too early for her mom to be home. At that moment, she heard noises from downstairs again. She didn't call out. She had been sleeping in her parents' room and ran into their bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Then she remembered their bathroom door had no lock on it. The noise she made slamming the door alerted the intruder to where in the house she was at, and big footsteps started coming upstairs. She moved quickly and quietly to her parents' closet, which was on the other side of the big room. She closed the doors and hid behind some clothes, all the time thinking how somebody would have gotten inside. She remembered that the garage door was cracked for the cat, slightly but not close enough for a thin person to slip under. Tim walks into the bedroom. Tim is tall and thin. She can see him through the slatted closet doors. She saw that he was holding a knife and did everything she could to not scream. He quickly went to the master bedroom where she was just moments before. These cookie-cutter houses only had about 3 floor plan layouts, so it wasn't hard for him to find. He looked inside the bathroom and didn't see her, then started making loud throaty noises like somebody would if they were frustrated. While pacing the entire house, she stayed in the closet for hours, even after she heard him exit through the front door. She stayed until her mom got home. She was crying hysterically and told her mom what happened. Had she not been so upset and had one of their kitchen knives not been left by the front door, her mom might have blamed it on being delirious from a high fever, because nobody would expect him to do this. The police were called and an official report filed. I'm not sure if he had any charges pressed against him, because after she told me the story once, she refused to talk about it again. I overheard her parents a few times talking about the situation, with my own parents, but never heard what the consequences were. He was so traumatized she went to therapy afterward for several years, and still wouldn't talk to anyone about it because she didn't want to remember or relive the experience. We even moved into an apartment together years and years later for college purposes. She never talked about Tim. It was like he never existed, and I never asked. I noticed she always locked the front door, which she should, of course. Always locked the door that led to the patio/balcony, even though we were on the 7th level, and always locked her bedroom door, onto which she added an additional lock. And when she locked all of those doors and the windows, she always checked like 3 times. Every single time. I often wonder if there was more to the story than what he told me. We were kids after all, and sometimes kids don't know how to explain things they don't understand. It's terrifying to think about what his intentions were, and if he perhaps did find E, and something else happened. As horrifying as the experience must have been for her, he made a huge statement in the neighborhood for everyone to be more careful. I will always make sure everything is locked, and I don't ever want to meet you again, Tim. This story extends from 8th grade middle school to my freshman year in college. I'm 24 years old now, so this must have begun in 2008. I was raised in a Korean household with strong Christian beliefs. Every summer and winter, there would be a youth retreat where all the teens in our church would go to one big joint retreat with counselors and teenagers from churches in and out of state. I met my best friend, Hannah, there. She was from Philly and had a pastor who was named Alan. After these retreats, everybody would add each other on Facebook and keep in touch. I remember a day or two after the '08 summer retreat, Pastor Allen would often reach out and ask how my walk with God was going since the retreat and if I ever needed someone to speak to. I could always confide in him. This didn't alarm me at the time because counselors would keep in touch all the time. I always kept our conversations brief considering the fact that I was shy and timid. Over the years, I'd always see Pastor Allen at retreats and was friendly with him. Nothing strange happened other than his persistence with keeping in touch with me on Facebook after retreats. I slowly stopped talking to him, and eventually we didn't speak at all. But this is where it gets weird. One day, after our summer retreat in 2011, I got a friend request from a woman named Sumiko. I noticed we had a lot of mutual friends from the retreat, so I assumed she was a counselor there. She messaged me immediately after I accepted the request. She and I became quickly acquainted. At the time, I was 15, and she was everything I needed in an older sister. Although we never met, I let my naivety get to me and confided in her about my teenage girl troubles. After months in, I remember walking into church and asking one of my youth leaders if they met a Sumiko at the retreat. He said he never heard of her. I asked him if he could check the roster, and he did, only to find out there was no Sumiko on the list. That's when things started to get super eerie for me. I panicked and went home to block Sumi on my Facebook. I saw on her page that the only person who continued to tell her it was nice seeing her was Pastor Allen. Nobody else from the retreat seemed to really be interacting with her. It all started to freak me out. I blocked her and unfriended Pastor Allen. I remember no longer attending these church retreats. A few days later, I received an email telling me that Sumiko was going through a hard time because of me, and that the email is coming from the mental hospital that she was staying at. They told me it was all my fault. I was a junior in high school under high amounts of stress from SATs, and I deleted the email because I just wanted to forget about it all and focus on studying. Shortly after, I started to receive really unfriendly anonymous messages on my Tumblr. They would tell me that I was going to burn in hell for eternity if I continued to stray from God, and they continued all the way into my senior year in high school. I always deleted and ignored them, or I'd reply sarcastically and laugh at them with my friends. Eventually the messages faded and I didn't hear much from them anymore. In 2012, I got accepted to a close-by Christian college, and I moved into my dorm. My dorm floor decided to have a little icebreaker meeting to help us get comfortable. I met another Korean girl and we began talking about our similarities in our childhood, being raised Korean with Christian parents. I opened up to her about my encounter with Pastor Allen, and midway through the story, I saw her face slowly dropping and getting pale. She told me she had a very similar encounter with a pastor she knew, and that he seemed like it might be the same man working with the youth in an all-Korean church. I asked where she was from, and she replied with the same state that Pastor Allen was from. She then asked me if the name of the pastor was Allen. We had the same predator in our lives at the same age. I'm not sure where Allen is now, but I hope that he has not harmed any little Korean girls, or anyone for that matter. It's absolutely disgusting. He was borderline 60 years old when I was 14 to 15. It makes me sick knowing people prey on children in the most vulnerable ways. It ruined a lot of my perspective on Christianity as well. It's horrible to take something so spiritual and take advantage of a child with it. So, Pastor Allen, the creepy young Asian girl fetish. Let's never meet again. Okay, so this just happened to me, female 28, and I'm sure I will not be able to sleep. My boyfriend is not answering the phone, and I need to get this out. My company organized an event for the clients and the staff at a luxury hotel. Everybody partied, and I got into my room an hour ago. It's 3:27 in the morning here. Like, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, a guy entered my room with a bottle of water. It woke me up. I was super scared. He says that somebody came from my room to order a bottle of sparkling water. Weird explanation. There is a minibar, and there is a corridor in the room before entering where I am in the bed. So basically I am half naked in my bed. He comes closer to me at the level of the table, apologizing for the inconvenience, but he is still there, and I kid you not, he starts talking to me, saying how he is going to be in trouble and stuff, and how someone called and he is so sorry, and the others got in the hotel super drunk, and it must have been a mistake. I swear he had been standing super close to my bed for 5 minutes, and I was so shocked I was just saying, No, it's okay. I just got scared. Really, no problem. Just go. Well, he says he doesn't see me well and asks my name. Twice, he says. Well, so I guess I wish you a good night then. Then kisses me on the cheek, like we French do, but once again, I'm half naked in my bed, dead scared, and he is in a suit, all dressed. Literally, I don't even know what I could have done. He left after the longest minute saying how he was sorry and how he would appreciate that I don't tell anyone. And now the phone in the room just rang. I don't know if I should still be scared. Was he just confused by the mistake? I'm super scared, though I cannot think right now and my heart is racing. I need to have some rational feedback after this, really. Update 1. I am okay, by the way, 34 hours later. So this is a story that happened to my mom's friends in Korea like 10 years ago. Every time I hear this story, I still get the chills. My mom's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband worked during the days. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got into the elevator in her building. When she got on, she noticed that there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low so that she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy and made her daughter stand to her side, furthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was that when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that she was carrying something wrapped inside newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in my mom's friend's head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend she was calling home to her husband who was obviously really not at home and at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm on the elevator and about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" And making it seem like her husband was waiting at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, I think she lived on like the 12th floor or something, she quickly got off and grabbed her daughter and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got off on her floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When my mom's friend got to her door, she started to bang on it and shout, "Hey, I'm home. Please open the door," and kind of pretended like he was coming to answer the door. Upon seeing this, the man in the yellow raincoat started to walk away back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far away enough, my mom's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open the door's passcode thingy. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea, and started to frantically punch in her key code. But the problem was that the buttons would make sounds, so the man knew that nobody was going to answer the door for her, and he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mom's friend at this point was practically screaming, and when she finally got her door to open, the first thing she did was throw her daughter in through the door. When she got in herself, she saw that the man was pretty much inches from the door, but she managed to shut it and lock it before he could wedge his hand or a weapon into the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away back towards the elevator. Several months later, my mom's friend was watching the news and there was coverage of the capture of a serial killer named Yu Young-chul, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mom that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the too familiar yellow raincoat and hat that he was wearing when apprehended.